Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto gets sealed away from fairy tale. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. And check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Part 1. Descendant of Shinobi. Just because history has forgotten something does not mean it no longer exists. The shinobi live on through their descendants, and it is the duty of those descendants, no matter how few, even if it's just me, to make sure that the shadows of that dark era do not invade the era we live in now. I cannot allow history to repeat itself. Mavis Vermilion. Several hundred years ago, the world was controlled by a power known as chakra. Those who used chakra were called shinobi. In the early days of the era of shinobi, clans of shinobi waged war against one another for contracts from feudal lords for centuries. It was an era of perpetual bloodshed, an era of non-stop war. Children no older than 5 years of age were thrown on the battlefield and expected to fight and die like the adults. It was an era of darkness and suffering. Only in the final century of this era did the constant warfare stop. Shinobi changed from a clan system to a ninja village system, where a village of ninjas served their country's leader. However, this did not put an end to war. It only created brief decades of peace before war broke out between the ninja villages again. A total of 4 great wars broke out in that century, each more bloody than the last. It was the 4th Great Shinobi War that finally broke the cycle of perpetual warfare that drove the era of shinobi. In that 4th war, a great beast known as the Shinju was unleashed upon the world by a villain named Madara Uchiha. The beast's might was so great that it drove the shinobi to the brink of extinction. However, in the final hour of the war, when all hope seemed to have died and the hour of doom appeared to be at hand, a hero emerged from the ranks of shinobi and defeated the beast, sealing it away. Both the hero and Madara vanished without a trace upon the war's conclusion, the end result of their battle remaining a mystery, though it is believed that the villain, Madara Uchiha, escaped with his life. Upon the war's conclusion, a true lasting peace was finally granted to the world. Unfortunately for the majority of shinobi, the only peace they gained was the peace of the dead. Centuries passed, and a new form of power known as magic rose to prominence, and mages controlled this power. A new form of power, magic, now controls the world. While war does not happen as often in this era of magic, unrest is all too common with dark guilds and evil cultists, worshipping the black mage Zeref cropping up every now and again. The era of shinobi may have faded into myth, but it still happened. Proof of its existence continues to be found by archaeologists and historians. The name, Madara Uchiha, crops up from time to time throughout history. He is now known as history's most powerful villain and believed to be immortal. He is just as feared as the black mage Zeref. To this day, his name still holds power. Strips of rusted metal with a symbol carved into it attached to what was once cloth are found on what was believed to be the site of the ancient war's final battle. Scrolls containing an ancient language and pictures of martial arts forms and hand seals are occasionally found in old libraries. Odd weapons that react to a form of power other than magic sometimes fall into the hands of folk heroes and criminals alike. The more recent discovery was an island protected by whirlpools. It is believed to be a treasure trove of ancient shinobi knowledge. The doors to some of its buildings are reinforced and closed off by ancient seals, leaving any knowledge they may contain locked away from all who lack the right. The era of shinobi may be over, but its legacy lives on. In the year X673, a child named Mavis Vermilion was born. This child is one of the last few surviving descendants of shinobi. She is living proof that the era existed and that its legacy lives on to this day. February, X686. Uzushio. A small dinghy with an intricate array of seals attached to its lone sail, drifted towards an island surrounded by vicious whirlpools. However, Mavis, the 13-year-old girl steering the boat, was not worried at all, as the current of one of the whirlpools grabbed the boat. If anything, she was excited if the look on her face was any indication. She formed a hand seal and a perfect copy of her appeared in a puff of smoke and took the job of steering the boat. She then jumped off the side of the boat and defied the laws of physics by running ahead of the boat on top of the water and towards the nearest whirlpool, her white haori with a blue flame-like motif decorating the bottom waving in the wind. She then bit her left thumb, drawing blood, and slammed it down on the water and incanted, Whirlpool Guardian Seal. Release. The water current immediately died down and the whirlpool subsided and vanished as Mavis jumped back onto her boat. She then looked towards the island as she said to herself, good thing mom's maiden name wasn't just for show, otherwise I would have had to take drastic measures to escape that whirlpool. I don't think Gamatoshi would have liked hopping over a whirlpool in the ocean. He broke out in a rash last time I summoned him in saltwater and then launched me halfway to the moon in retaliation, and now I'm rambling. We need friends. Mavis's shadow clone stated as it continued to steer. She then sighed and moaned out in depression, I know. Mavis dragged her boat ashore with the help of her shadow clone and then told it to split up with her so they could search the island twice as fast. It took Mavis only an hour to find what looked like the remains of a town that was split in half by a river. The side she was on looked like what used to be a residential district. She could find nothing but the remains of houses and the occasional rusted weapon and kitchen utensil everywhere she looked. She then sat down on the time-worn remains of a destroyed fountain and thought, it looks like a battle happened here when this place was destroyed. At least, that's what the old weapons indicate. Nothing secretive is here either since there are no hidden trapdoors or blood-sealed scrolls in any of the houses, so this must be the residential district. Mavis then looked past the river and thought, which means that side should be the shinobi district. As Mavis walked across the river and gave the remains of a bridge a passing glance, the memories of her shadow clone returned to her. Her eyes brightened as she broke out into a run and said to herself, this has to be important that it's still intact and locked by a blood seal. She bolted down the road, careful to avoid any stray rusted weapons, so as to not cut her bare feet. She quickly came up to what her shadow clone found, a massive cathedral-like building with no windows. At the front of it all was a giant door with the Uzumaki spiral emblazoned in the center. Mavis placed her hand on the door and channeled some chakra into the door, revealing the sealing array keeping the door closed. Yes, this is definitely important, she said to herself. Mavis bit her recently healed left thumb hard enough to draw blood again and pressed it against the sealing array. The seals glowed and vanished. Mavis then backed away as she heard and then saw the giant stone doors opening on their own power. She looked inside and saw the atrium of the building. She entered and looked around in wonder as lights hung from the ceiling turned on one by one. The lights must operate on chakra. Mavis thought as she walked towards the nearest door. What she saw when she entered the room was a lot of bookshelves filled with scrolls. She grabbed the nearest one and opened it without bothering to look at the title written on it. As expected, given when the scroll was made, all the writing was in Shinobiese. I will never take mom and dad's language classes for granted ever again. I might never have to speak Shinobiese to anyone except the older Toad summons, since it's a dead language, but I'll definitely have to read it if I plan on learning what's in these scrolls. Mavis read through the scroll and learned that it was a scroll on the basics of the sealing arts, also known as Fuinjutsu. Mom already taught me this stuff. Mavis thought to herself as she rolled the scroll up and put it back. She then grabbed the scroll next to it and bothered to look at the title this time. It read, Intermediate Level Fuinjutsu for Dummies. Mavis grinned sheepishly to herself and thought, this must be the sequel to the scroll I just looked through, which would explain why I already knew the stuff in the last one. Mom did say that every descendant of the Uzumaki clan should be well versed in the sealing arts, well she was drilling this stuff into my head, so I guess I won't need this scroll either. Since I'd like to see as much of this place as I can as quickly as possible. Mavis made her current most frequently used hand seal and created a shadow clone. She then told it, find something interesting. I'll keep exploring this place. The shadow clone gave her an enthusiastic thumbs up and wandered deeper into the room. Mavis then left the room and continued to explore the massive building. After an hour of exploring, she managed to figure out the general layout of the place. Each room is dedicated to a different branch of the shinobi arts. The first one is Fuinjutsu, and then there are the rooms with scrolls on ninjutsu and jinjutsu. The room with scrolls on taijutsu forms has scrolls on weapon techniques mixed in with it, and there is even a room filled with normal literature from the era of shinobi. It appears my ancestors were great at hoarding knowledge and were just as good at preserving it, since none of the scrolls in this place show any signs of falling apart. The archaeologists were right when they suspected this place to be a treasure trove of ancient knowledge. Now I'm really glad that Northswain sent me here to continue my studies in the shinobi arts. This place has everything I need to complete my shinobi training well, everything short of an actual teacher, Mavis thought to herself as she walked towards a larger than average door with a Uzumaki spiral embedded in the center of the door. This is the only room I haven't been in yet, let's see what's inside. Mavis said to herself as she went through the same motions that she did to open the building's main doors. Just like the main doors, this door opened by itself upon activation, and upon entering, Mavis quickly learned why the building was so large. This room was massive, yet mostly vacant. There were a few bookcases filled with scrolls, but mostly nothing else. Mavis examined one of the scrolls and noticed something different about it. Unlike the rest of the scrolls she saw today, this one had the Uzumaki spiral printed on it. These scrolls must be for clan-exclusive techniques, Mavis thought as she looked up at the odd patterns on the wall. If this room was locked behind a blood seal and this place was open to the public back when this island was populated, then this room should have all sorts of information on my ancestors, since only people with Uzumaki blood can access this room. Mavis put the scroll back and ran up to the nearest wall to get a closer look at the patterns. Upon closer inspection after running up the wall, the pattern was actually a bunch of lines connecting names together like some sort of family tree. She observed and noted that the names she read had dates next to them, and some of the names that were connected had a description of the nature of the relationship between the two people. This is a family tree, Mavis thought. These two were married and had 3 children, according to the 3 lines connecting those 3 to their parents. These two had a random fling that resulted in a child. This woman had a child through rape. How the heck does this family tree know this stuff? The dates I just read are from long after this town was destroyed, and there's certainly no way all these people bothered to travel here and record this information. Mavis searched the room from her vantage point and noticed 2 podiums on 2 opposite sides of the room. She jumped from her vantage point and then walked towards the closest podium. Upon reaching it, she observed that the podium had a sheet of paper nailed to it. At the top of the paper was the words, "The Podium of Answers." Mavis thought, the Podium of Answers? Is this thing supposed to answer questions? Mavis channeled her chakra into the podium and saw that every inch of the podium was covered in seals that quickly faded away the moment she stopped channeling her chakra into it. She thought, maybe it can answer questions, or at least do something. Mom always did say that the art of sealing is only limited to the imagination and ability of the user. Mavis brought a pen out from somewhere in her black, knee-length dress and wrote the question, "What is this building?" on the paper. The ink vanished and nothing happened. Mavis waited for a few minutes before trying again, this time writing in Shinobiese. "What is this building?" The ink vanished again, but this time was replaced by the words, "The Great Uzumaki Library." So that's the name of this building. Now for something about that family tree, Mavis thought. How is the Uzumaki family tree able to record such descriptive things about the people it records? The podium answered, the family tree was created by the first head of the Uzumaki clan, and the mechanics that operate the family tree is a seal so unbelievably complex that even the genius that created this podium could not figure out how it works. It looks like the questions this podium can answer are limited to the knowledge of its creator. Mavis thought as she started to write another question. How can I find my name on the tree? Her answer was, write your name on the podium of navigation, and if you are a member of the great Uzumaki clan, you will be taken to your name on the family tree. That must be the other podium I saw earlier, Mavis thought. One more question before I go look up my entry on that tree. Her final question for the podium was an impulsive one, where do the fairies live? The answer she got was disappointing. The genius that created this podium never bothered to look into the existence of fairies, so this podium lacks the knowledge needed to confirm or deny the existence of fairies. Therefore, this podium cannot tell you where the fairies live. The cloud of depression hung over Mavis as she silently cried and thought as she walked away from the podium of answers, at least, it didn't deny the existence of Fiery Eso, so I might still be able to see the fairies if I look real hard and never give up. She then shook her head and wiped the tears from her eyes as she resolutely looked at and then began to walk towards the podium of navigation across the massive room. No crying. Dad said that the fairies do not reveal themselves to crybabies. When she reached the podium, she confirmed that it was titled, the Podium of Navigation. She wrote her name on the podium as the podium of answers instructed, and the ground she was standing on began to move, much to her surprise. Mavis quickly regained her wits and noticed that the ground she was standing on, podium and all, was now levitating itself and floating towards a specific section of the lowest end of the Uzumaki family tree. The platform Mavis was standing on melded with the wall upon reaching it, allowing her to examine her name on the family tree. She then looked up from her name and saw the names of her parents, Dezel Vermilion and Rain Uzumaki Vermilion. She also saw the nature of their relationship, married, and their dates of birth and death. Curiosity then slowly crept its way into Mavis's head. She decided that she wanted to see just how far she could track her ancestry, even though she knew that there was no way she could possibly recognize the names. Mavis crawled along the wall as if it were the ground and followed the line connected to her mother's name upwards. It's a good thing that the upwards lines represent the Uzumaki bloodline and connect only those immediately attached or directly contributed to the Uzumaki bloodline. Mavis thought, otherwise I would be getting myself completely lost. And this one was born in X120 and this one was born in X102. I'm getting closer to the conclusion of the era of Shinobi since I'm currently looking at the conclusion of the Void Century. I always did wonder what happened back then. Chakra was almost completely dead, though still more prominent than it is now, and magic didn't become a dominant source of power for another few decades. Here we are. The date of birth of these two is written differently, but the date of death of this Shion person is X030. Looks like this person doesn't have a surname, and the nature of her relationship with this Naruto Uzumaki is listed as complicated. Let's just refer to this as an impulsive promise and comfort sex that somehow resulted in a child. Well, these two did survive the war that ended the era of Shinobi, so something like this would probably be pretty common for survivors. Mavis's eyes then drifted over Naruto's entry and then noticed something that made her eyes widen in shock. She then shook her head and rubbed her eyes to make sure she saw it right. She looked at her ancestor's entry again and saw that her eyes were not deceiving her. No date of death. This guy is still alive. How? He'd have to be nearly 700 years old. Nobody lives that long. Well, the toad summons Du and North Swain, but that doesn't apply to humans. Is this some sort of malfunction? Mavis created a few shadow clones and had them look over every entry to see if what she just read was an isolated incident. While her clones were busy, Mavis looked up the entry just above Naruto's. Kushina Uzumaki, she died the day her son was born. She married a man named Minato Namikaze, and it looks like he died on the same day. Wait, what's this extra bit raised? As an undead warrior by the impure resurrection technique on October 9th, X000, what the heck? Are this guy and his son still somehow wandering Earthland as an immortal and a zombie? I think I'm done looking at this family tree for now. Mavis quickly stood up and ran down the wall. She also decided that she would examine the scrolls in the room at a later date as she headed for the door. When she exited the room, her clones dispelled and relayed their gathered information to her. Okay, it looks like Naruto Uzumaki's situation really is an isolated incident, so that means he probably really is somehow still alive. Did he put himself in suspended animation? I think I'll just save that question for later. However, the situation with his dad, Minato Namikaze, is not an isolated incident, though it only happened to one other person. Hashirama Senju, married to Mito Uzumaki Senju, is also a zombie that is probably still wandering Earthland to this very day. I should probably ask North Swain about this when I get back to the caves under Crocus, or the elder toad sage brother Gamakichi next time I visit Mount Mayaboku. Those two know just about everything, so I wouldn't put it past them to know a thing or two about this. I'm starting to think the chakra might be some sort of supernatural weirdness magnet, but that could also be a good thing. It might help me meet the fairies since fairies might be supernatural too. But that random thought brightening her day, Mavis continued to explore the great Uzumaki library. That night, Mavis found an intact house in the shinobi district of the town that she could use for the night. Mavis was honestly surprised when she discovered that some of the houses in the shinobi district were not only intact but nearly perfectly preserved. The only damage to be found being battle damage. After all she had seen in the great Uzumaki library, however, she decided to chalk her findings up on the Uzumaki clan, using their sealing techniques to build things to last. Mavis decided to look through the house a little before going to bed. On the walls, she saw pictures of a family of redeeds. She looked at the table under the pictures and saw a picture of just a little girl that was with her parents on the pictures on the wall. The picture was falling out of its frame, so Mavis decided to take it out of its frame to get a closer look. During her examination, she noticed that there was writing on the back. Kushina Uzumaki, age 5. Kushina Uzumaki? That's the name Naruto Uzumaki's mother. I wonder how she would have reacted to finding out that her son is some sort of immortal. I don't see any more pictures of her at a later age, so she must have escaped whatever conflict that destroyed this town. Mavis decided that she was done exploring the house of her late ancestor and went to bed. However, a few hours after she had fallen into a deep sleep, Mavis experienced something she had learned to both expect and dread. She had a vision, a terrifying prophetic vision. Mavis saw an island with a massive tree under a starry sky. What she saw quickly moved to a cave under the tree. She saw a blonde-haired man wearing a white haori similar to her own, only it had a higher collar than hers, had a red flame pattern on it instead of blue, and it had the name Fourth Hokage written vertically down it in Shinobiese. His hands were pressed against a door, desperately trying to keep it from opening and unleashing the evil energy that Mavis could somehow feel leaking through the door. Mavis heard him speak, "Damn it, why did one of the transfer gems have to be stolen while I was gone? This remote island just had to be attacked by a dark guild while I was sabotaging that super weapon the Magic Council was foolish enough to create, and they just had to find this chamber and somehow manage take the transfer gem without being corrupted by the Shinju's power." Mavis's eyes widened when she heard that name. Shinju. As in the beast from the myth. The one that Elder Gamakichi helped the hero fight against. That Shinju. The Shinju's power was now visibly leaking from the door. The man pushed against the door even harder. A sealing array appeared on the door and glowed brightly, blocking off the evil energy. "No. You're not getting out." Unfortunately, the Shinju did not agree with him. Mavis heard something that sounded similar to cracking glass. Cracks appeared on the seal, and then, the seal shattered. A mighty force blew the door open and sent the man flying out of the chamber, and Mavis followed as if the force hit her as well. The next thing she saw was the man getting back up while missing an arm. However, instead of leaking blood, the arm was reforming, as if an invisible force was putting him back together like a paper match project. Now that Mavis could get a good look at him, she noticed that a few cracks ran along his face, and the whites of his eyes were pitch black. This man looked as if he were undead. Before Mavis could even mentally comment on her observation, the ground shook, and then the area surrounding the giant tree, and the tree itself, exploded upwards. Towering over the undead man stood a 10-tailed beast with one eye, one mouth, and one ear, each on a different part of the head. The beast was massive, easily taking up 2/3 of the island. The Shinju glared down at the man, opened its mouth, and unleashed a deafening roar that would forever haunt Mavis's nightmares. Mavis awoke in a cold sweat with a terrified scream. She panted and shivered in terror as she recalled her vision. That was just like when I saw mom and dad die in my dreams, and they died for real a few weeks later. Their wounds perfectly matched how they were killed in my dream. Was this dream another one of my visions of the future? Mom and dad's deaths were just the first time my dreams became a reality. My visions of the deaths of others and then trying to warn them before they become a reality are the biggest reason why I have no friends. Now I've just foreseen the release of a monster powerful enough to destroy the world. Is it even possible to stop this from happening? Sleep eluded Mavis for the remainder of the night. She devoted the remainder of the month to searching for and learning large-scale sealing techniques in the Great Uzumaki Library, preparing herself for the possibility of her vision becoming a reality. While studying one of Uzumaki clan scrolls, Mavis thought to herself, I managed to get a good look at the stars in that vision before I woke up. A few of the constellations I saw only appear during the months of April and May. This means that I have at least a month and a half to prepare, gather as much information as I can on the Shinju, track down this island, and find a way to fix the seal that man was holding together. This is one vision I absolutely cannot allow to come true. The fate of the world now depends on me defying fate. Never thought that would happen. On the last day of February in the year X686, Mavis disembarked from the island of her ancestors. Determined to locate the island the Shinju was sealed on. She resolved herself to find a way to defy her vision and save the world from the release of the Shinju. March, X686. Mount Myaboku. Mavis had decided that if she was going to ascertain where the Shinju was sealed, she was going to have to consult the only being she knew that had encountered the beast. The only issue she had to overcome to obtain the information she seeks is the simple yet annoying task of helping Elder Gamakichi find his senile younger brother, Gamatatsu. A small, orange, and wrinkled toad wearing a dark blue vest ground out while using his staff to help him walk. I swear, if that senile airhead forgot how to swim in the middle of the pond again, I'm just gonna let him drown. Can frogs drown? Mavis asked. Do I have gills? Gamakichi asked rhetorically. No. Then yes, we can drown. It just takes a very long time for it to happen, since we can absorb oxygen through our skin. It's not a substitute for breathing, but it does help stave off drowning, Gamakichi explained. Mavis then asked, wouldn't Elder Gamatatsu remember how to swim before that happens? Considering how flighty that senile airhead is, I wouldn't put it past him to forget, panic, sink like a rock, and then keep panicking until he finally passes out and drowns. Was Gamakichi's immediate response. How often does this happen? Mavis asked, silently hoping that Gamatatsu's possible situation is not as bad as the old toad is making it out to be. Unfortunately, it was as bad as Gamakichi made it out to be, on a good week. Every other day. A bad week. Once a day. That bad? Yep. Then, a high-pitched voice cried out in the direction of the toad oil fountain, help. Big brother. I forgot how to swim. I'm drowning in the oil fountain. Gamakichi's response was to sigh in exasperation and mutter, I hate it when I'm right. Why do I have to be my senile brother's keeper? If you're the older brother, how did he go senile before you? Mavis asked, suddenly in her annoying question asking 13-year-old girl mode. Gamakichi humored her by answering, I ask myself that same question every day. Thanks big brother, you saved my life. Gamatatsu, a wrinkled yellow frog wearing a vest just like his older brother, exclaimed in his dreamlike voice, as if his mind was not completely there. Next time I'm just gonna let you drown. Was the elder brother's response. Gamatatsu, however, was not perturbed by his brother's declaration, oh, you always say that every time you save me from drowning. And I'll keep saying that until you stop being senile. Gamakichi argued. Mavis decided to throw her 2 jewels in at this point from atop her perch on a toad statue, and added, then you'll probably have to keep saying it, because I heard that once you go senile, you never go back. Yeah, whatever the older toad sage brother bemoaned before saying, anyway, what did you want to ask me, Mavis? You don't really stop by all that often since I already told you that I won't teach you the sage arts until your body has matured enough to handle it. I'm not here for that was Mavis's response, I'm actually here because I wanted to ask you if you knew anything about where the Shinju was sealed. Gamakichi went silent for a few long seconds. Then he took a deep breath and exhale. Even the hilariously senile Gamatatsu was silent, though he did look back and forth between his older brother and Mavis. Finally, Gamakichi responded, let's continue this conversation at my house. Mavis nodded and followed. Mavis and the Toad Sage brothers were now sitting around a small table clearly designed for amphibians the same size as the brothers. The grave atmosphere was set by Gamakichi slowly taking deep drags from a cigarette. The older sage finally spoke, why do you want to know where the Shinju was sealed? That place is best left undisturbed. I'm asking because I think someone has already disturbed it. was Mavis's reply. I had another vision, and it's been repeating itself about 2 nights every week. What did you see in these visions? Gamakichi asked. I saw a massive creature with 10 tails escape an ancient seal on an island with a massive tree. It was nighttime, and a man that looked undead was trying to hold the seal shut. By the way he looked, it appeared he was holding it shut for a very long time. Mavis explained. 10 tails, that's definitely the Shinju. And you said this was taking place at night, correct? Yes. Amakichi continued his question. Did you get a look at the stars during your vision? No, I was more concerned about the giant monster preparing to bring about the end of the world as we know it. Mavis replied. Then we'll just have to take another look at it together. Tatsu? You're paying attention, right? Yes, big brother Gamatatsu replied. Both toad sages hopped over to Mavis and stood on her shoulders. Mavis turned her head repeatedly, looking at the 2 sages and wondering what they had planned until both sages placed a webbed hand on the side of her head. Amakichi explained, now, Mavis, I need you to close your eyes and focus on your visions. Gamatatsu and I will take care of the rest. Mavis closed her eyes and concentrated. Her vision began to play out again. She saw the island and tree under a starry sky. She saw the undead man trying and failing to hold back the seal. She saw the Shinju burst free from its confinement and unleash a terrifyingly triumphant roar. She looked to her left shoulder and saw Gamakichi observing the stars, or more specifically, the constellations. Then, right before the memory ended, Mavis heard a muffled voice. It sounded almost like the voice of a woman. Mavis couldn't quite make out what she was saying. All she heard was, do have power. You free? Amakichi stroked his chin and thought while Gamatatsu said, wow, that was scary. I hope Minato is okay. Losing his arm must have hurt real bad. The name Gamatatsu said drew Mavis's attention to him and she asked, Minato? As in, Minato Namikaze. That's who that undead person is. Yep. Gamatatsu replied in his dreamlike voice, he's one of our summoners. His son Naruto is too. Gamakichi and I knew him because he summoned us a few times back when we were young. He gave me candy sometimes. Gamakichi, can we get candy? Damn it, Gamatatsu. How many times do I have to remind you that you can't eat candy anymore? You'll just give yourself a heart attack. Gamakichi replied irritably while trying to retain his train of thought. Gamakichi then hopped off Mavis's shoulder while his younger brother remembered and lamented his inability to eat sweets. Gamakichi then spoke up, now if we can get back on track for a minute. I can tell the little lady here that we still have about a month, give or take a week, to fix this mess. Mavis spoke up, how did you figure that out? Gamakichi answered, the stars. Some of the constellations I saw in your memory are only in the sky during late April and stick around for about a week into May. We have about a month to find the transfer gem and return it to that island. Mavis gave a sigh of relief, good, so we have some time to find this island and the gem. Finding the island is the easy part, just give me a modern map and I'll point it out to you. I've been there before so I know where it is. Also, Gamatatsu, you can get off her shoulder now. Gamakichi explained. Mavis reached into her Haori and pulled out a storage scroll while the younger sage brother fell off her shoulder. She then started pulling random books, ranging from an instruction manual on illusion magic to tactics books. There was even a book on holy magic, out of the scroll in puffs of smoke. Nope, that's not it, still need to get around to reading that one. North Swain said, this holy magic will help supplement the magic he taught me, so I'll read up on it and practice it while looking for the island. Why do I still have this? Aha. Found it. Mavis slapped the map down on the table and waited for Gamakichi to point out the island's location. She only had to wait a few seconds before he pointed at a very small landmass between Harjan Port and a larger landmass that was considered a part of the kingdom of Fiori. There, that's where Naruto sealed himself and the Shinju away. Mavis thought to herself out loud, I see, so that's how my ancestor survived for so long. He sealed himself away with the Shinju. Amakichi chose to respond to Mavis's thought, yeah, that was kinda the best option out of a list of bad options we had to choose from at the time. We couldn't just wait for Naruto to take the monster with him to the grave by waiting for him to die of old age because the Shinju would just reform after his death. We didn't want to have him sealed away forever either because that would just be a fate worse than death. So we decided to set up a vast sealing array that would slowly and non-fatally transfer the Shinju to a prison, specifically designed to restrain it forever in its weakened state. I also worked in an amnesia seal into the array so that Naruto would forget his past after awakening because, quite frankly, he was starting to get a little too emo for my tastes during the time after the war and before the sealing. Granted, he had the very good excuse of losing just about everything he ever cared about to Madara and the Shinju, but that doesn't change how annoying it was for me to see him like that. With any luck, he'll be back to his old self once he wakes up, minus his memories. Also, how did you find out Naruto is your ancestor? I knew because I met the woman you inherited your foresight from, but how did you find out? Mavis answered, I found out when I investigated the Great Uzumaki Library. Yeah, that would do it. That family tree is frighteningly accurate. There's no way the ancient Uzumaki could have created that with chakra-based fuinjutsu alone. There's a limit to what chakra and seal. Amaterasu blurted out, maybe they mixed the seals that made the family tree with rune magic. Amakichi almost rebuked his brother on how it was impossible to mix magic and chakra together like that until the facts of what the power sources were made of dawned him. Tatsu. You airheaded genius. Mavis was lost. What? How is Elder Gamatatsu a genius? Amakichi answered, okay, time for a short lesson. What is chakra made of? Physical energy and spiritual energy. Mavis answered automatically, as if reading facts from a textbook. And what is magic made of? Spiritual energy and ether nano. What is the ancient name for ether nano? Natural chakra. And how does one enter sage mode? By taking natural chakra or ether nano into your body and controlling it by mixing it with your weight. Are you saying that the person that made the Uzumaki family tree was a sage? Mavis asked in shock. That's exactly what I'm saying. It is possible to use chakra and magic at the same time, but only if you're a sage, because only sages possess all the necessary forms of energy needed to use both at the same time, Gamakichi explained. You know, this is only going to encourage me to hound you for lessons on how to use sage mode, Mavis said coyly. My answer is the same as always, not until your body has matured enough to handle it. Oh, come on. Please. Mavis pouted. No. I'll be your best friend. You could give me all the sake in the world and prance around the mountain in your birthday suit all day for my amusement, and my answer will still be no. April, X686. Tenro Island. Mavis spent the remainder of the month of March training with the toads and frogs on Mount Mayaboku, further preparing her for the trial she is about to face. She even received a warning from the elder toad sage, Gamabunta, that he had a vision showing that the events that are about to take place will decide if the future will be one of despair or hope. It still amuses her that out of the 3 toad sages of Mount Mayaboku, it was the youngest that went senile first. Upon leaving Mount Mayaboku, Mavis made her way to Harjan Port, the closest port to the island Gamakichi directed her towards. From there she modified a dinghy by adding wind-based seals to its sails and left for the island. But the speed she had her boat traveling at, along with the calm weather, it only took her a day and a half to reach the island. She did not like what she sensed upon landing. Malevolence. A barely restrained storm of malevolence was radiating from the giant tree at the center of the island. She thought to herself, I'm definitely running out of time. I know where to take the transfer gem now, but I don't know where it was taken. I'd best start by looking for clues about who took it. I need to get in and out of here as quickly as possible. Every minute wasted is a minute towards the Shinju's release. She searched the island and came across what appeared to be the ruins of a town and guild hall. Mostly decomposed skeletons littered the area. If her visions had not already desensitized Mavis to death, she would have run away screaming in horror. Instead, she just shivered in discomfort and did her best to ignore the deceased, taking note that the clothing on many of the corpses bore the symbol of the Red Lizard Guild. However, she also noted that the clothing of a few of the corpses bore a symbol that looked like a blue skull. I need to check the chamber my ancestor, Minato, is holding together before leaving. By the looks of these ruins, it looks like a guild war happened here between Red Lizard and a guild that wearing the symbol of a blue skull. Considering how few blue skulls are lying around, Red Lizard lost and was wiped out. The victors must have taken the transfer gem, but I better check with my ancestor to make sure. Mavis bolted straight for the giant tree, getting away from the ruins as quickly as she could. When she reached the tree, she began to circle it, looking for anything that looked like a tunnel. She found it in little over a minute and descended into the tunnel. She quickly learned that she was not alone when she heard voices echoing through the cave. She followed the sound and came to the chamber that she saw in her visions. However, instead of just seeing her undead ancestor holding the seal together, she saw 3 men in their late teens. The one that appeared to be the leader wore a high-collared black jacket and had slicked back blonde hair. There was another blonde in the group as well, though it appeared to be a bit spikier and a darker shade. The last member of the group looks like a tree, a black-haired tree. So let me get this straight, the leader said, addressing the undead man. All the legends about the era of shinobi are true. The monster responsible for ending it all is sealed right behind that door you're holding shut, and the door started to visibly leak evil energy when the Tenru Jade was removed from its spot on the door. Yes, was Minato's response. The other blonde asked, and we should believe this why? Mavis decided to join the conversation by saying, because chakra users like me are living proof that the era of shinobi actually happened, and the malevolent energy visibly leaking from that door should be proof enough that we don't want whatever is behind that door walking freely. The 3 men spun around in surprise, not expecting a little girl to eavesdrop on their conversation with a very unhelpful undead man. They were just treasure hunters looking for an S-class treasure known as the Tenru Jade. They did not sign up for a mission to save the world from an ancient evil. Unfortunately, the undead man was being very insistent, and the evil energy that even potential mages that know nothing about magic can feel was proof enough that something had to be done. Their day may have gotten weird the second they met the undead fourth Hokage, but it looked like the mysterious girl from nowhere was determined to make their day even weirder. Part 2. Challenging Fate. The era of shinobi was real. I should know that better than anyone else. I also know just how bloody it was, at least at the end of it. The Great Dragon Civil War also happened. They both ended the same way, nearly everyone died. The Shinju wiped out almost every last shinobi, and Aknoloja is determined to wipe out any dragons he may have missed and will probably set his sights on everything alive someday. I shouldn't even be here, but here I am. Alive, and I'm going to keep living. I'll keep living until the dark shadows of my era are permanently erased from this comparatively peaceful world. The era of shinobi is over, the constant warfare is over, and the never-ending bloodshed is ended. I have freed myself from the Uchiha's control so that I can someday end their plans, and all it cost me was one of the two most precious treasures I ever had. The other one was lost to me soon after, lost to the curse of the Uchiha clan. I am empty now. I cannot age, I cannot die, I have not felt happiness in centuries. I doubt anything will ever make me truly smile again. Naruto or any of your descendants, anyone that has inherited your gift, the ability to bring hope to the hopeless. The ability to make people believe again. Will I ever see it again? Will I ever feel the warm light of hope again? Medic. April, X686. Harjan Port. The day was supposed to be just another boring day for a wandering pink-haired woman in a hooded cloak. She was not supposed to notice a 13-year-old girl with an active and quite frankly massive chakra system walk past her with a trio to treasure hunters from Sylph Labyrinth. She was not supposed to notice vague similarities between the child and an old friend. She was not supposed to follow her and the lead treasure hunter when they went to a bar to gather intel and conceal herself in the shadows. Unfortunately, she did. The end result of that was for her to bear witness to the beginning of the end of her life of monotony. Mavis was having the time of her life. For the first time since she lost her parents, she was traveling with people instead of by herself. Everything was starting to look more vibrant to her. She didn't care if the world was teetering on the edge of destruction. She was finally traveling with people. She felt like she finally has friends. Sure, Precht, Warad and Yuri might not feel the same way at the moment, but she planned to change that. She will worm her way into their hearts and make sure they did not suffer the same fate other people that got close to her suffered. While Mavis followed Precht into a bar, she thought to herself, I have resolved myself to defying my visions of death. If I ever see any of them die in my visions, I will save them. I'm done sitting on the sidelines. I won't let anyone else I care about get killed, not when I can protect them. Mavis was snapped out of her thoughts when the shady-looking bartender mentioned Blue Skull, the guild they were looking for being a mage guild, and then joined the conversation when he asked, can I interest you in some milk, miss? Mavis's response was to look up at him, which was difficult considering how she was as tall as the bar, and say, no, we want information. The bartender and patrons laughed and then told Precht to get lost, calling him a babysitter. This annoyed Precht to the point that he decided that their time would be better spent somewhere else. Mavis disagreed. She asked the bartender, how do you know Blue Skull is a mage guild? That one question shut the bartender up, he even started to sweat a little. Mavis continued, there are countless combat, merchant, and treasure hunting guilds in the country, and you singled out Blue Skull as a mage guild. That one statement was enough for Precht to realize that there was more going on here than he was expecting. It was enough for him to stay and hear out the rest of what Mavis had to say. This can only mean that you at least know of them. The bartender stammered and tried to explain himself. However, he couldn't find a way to talk his way out of the situation, so he accepted a signal from one of his bar patrons that it was time to silence the kid and treasure hunter. They knew too much. Precht, however, had already figured out what was going on. He kicked a bar patron that was about to slam a bar stool into his head away from him while grabbing Mavis under his right arm. He gave a thug that was coming at him with a broken bottle the same treatment, just with his right leg instead of his left. Care to explain? Precht asked. The bartender didn't back down. He shouted, he's just one guy. Kick his ass. Precht's response was to pull out a bladed chain from his concealed holster on his left arm and go to town on every bar thug in the room. He even grabbed a thug with his chain and used the thug to cause grievous harm with a body to any bar thug near them by spinning him in a circle. Precht announced, while still slapping bar thugs around with a chain thug, I am he who dances with blades, and I do so at my leisure. Mavis and her hidden observer silently agreed that Precht was probably the best chain fighter they have ever seen. The bartender cursed out the treasure hunter before grinning and pulling on a rope that randomly descended from the ceiling. The rope pull triggered a mechanism under the floor that caused the floorboards around Precht and Mavis to flip, revealing a magic circle and creating a barrier around the two. The bartender unbuttoned the top button of his shirt and revealed the mark of Blue Skull on his upper chest. Prek muttered, so he really is a Blue Skull member. Well, Mavis narrowed her eyes at the bartender. Prek prepared to launch an attack at the bartender, but thought better of it when he said that stepping out of the magic circle would result in him and Mavis suffering a gory demise. While the Blue Skull member revealed his guild status as a dark guild and Prek snarked that he must be low in the guild's food chain, Mavis got on her hands and knees and examined the magic circle surrounding them. When Prek irritably demanded what she was doing, she responded, "This glyph is incorrect." That comment garnered Prek and the bartender's undivided attention. Mavis observed the error in the magic barrier and deduced, this is a type of barrier formation magic that uses raison glyphs as its main constituent, but the glyph right here is a low glyph. The two look similar so the mix-up is understandable. Mavis then got up, patted the floor dirt off her dress in Haori, and approached the edge of the barrier, disregarding Prek's warnings, and hopped out of the magic circle completely unharmed. She then directed her attention at the bartender and said, because of that one error, the magic circle is completely useless, it cannot contain or harm anything. Rune magic is a very precise art, so one error, no matter how small, is enough to completely ruin whatever you try to create. Mavis spread her arms and announced, I'm a mage too, by the way, and quite a prodigy. As you have probably figured out, I can use rune magic, though I've never used it offensively before. I can also summon things and have a true offensive magic. So, how do you want to be intimidated into spilling your secrets? The bartender gathered his bearings and scoffed, a little brat like you? A mage. Don't make me laugh. Mavis smiled, then a demonstration is in order. Come forth. From the stairs of heaven, fly thee down. Holy guardian beast. Heavenly wolf. Suddenly, a massive wolf with flames erupting from its fur and small trees growing out of its paws appeared out of nowhere and glared down at the bartender, shocking the target, Prek, and any bar patrons that were still conscious. The only person that was not intimidated by the beast was Mavis's secret observer who simply thought to herself, illusion magic. One can make it look like a summoning when used properly, and it looks like she did just that. Not bad for a kid. I wonder what her offensive magic is. Mavis narrowed her eyes at the bartender and asked, where is Blue Skull's base? Speak. Now. The bartender wet himself and caved in out of fear. Mavis's silent observer continued to follow her from the shadows. Watching as the girl explained how the wolf was just an illusion, a bluff, though she could have just blasted him through the bar's walls if she really wanted to. The only reason she didn't was because they needed him conscious. She then assumed a pose and announced, we have located our targets. The town west from here called Magnolia. The observer almost smiled at the child's enthusiasm as she bounced around while her partner tried to keep up. Her energy reminded her observer of her old teammate. It was then that the observer decided that she was definitely going to keep a close eye on the girl. She was too interesting to not follow. 3 days later. Outskirts of Magnolia Town. Mavis's observer trailed the group of 4 all the way to the outskirts of Magnolia Town. On the way there, she bore witness to the 13-year-old girl practicing a technique that she never thought she would see again. A Rasengan. That looked like she was still a long way from completing it if the lack of progress on getting the rubber ball to shatter from the inside was anything to go by. It was only because her old teammate described the 3-step process that he had to do to learn the technique that she even knew what the little girl was doing. The observer also noticed something else about the girl during the 3 days she spent watching her. She was really desperate to make friends. Luckily, it appears that the treasure hunters she is traveling with are warming up to her. What she gleaned from the conversation she overheard taught her more about just what they were doing and convinced her that they needed to succeed in their quest. She learned that the Shinju was sealed away upon the conclusion of the Fourth Great Shinobi War and that a vital component in the sealing known as the Tenru Jade has been stolen and needed to be returned as quickly as possible. Failure to do so would result in the Shinju's release. This caused the observer to experience an emotion that she had not felt in a very long time. Fear. She was a remnant of the era of shinobi. She knew just how dangerous the Shinju was. By comparison, the Shinju made dragons look like sweet cuddly bunnies. However, another thing that worried her was their destination. Magnolia Town is under the control of one of the more brutal dark guilds in Fiori, Blue Skull. Their leader, Jeffrey, is a powerful mage, feared for his mastery of telekinesis and dispel magic. She trailed behind them, out of sight, not willing to alert the 4 of her presence, and girded herself for the inevitable battle to come. When the quartet arrived in Magnolia Town, they did not like what they saw. In fact, they were horrified. The majority of the buildings had fallen into disrepair, and the town's biggest landmark, Cardia Cathedral, was dominated by a massive dragon skeleton, comprised of blue bones. The group began to question if people even still lived in Magnolia Town, and that question was answered when an old man approached them and warned the group that they had best leave while they still can. Yuri saw fit to tell the old man that this is actually where they're supposed to be right now. The old man chose to inform the group, this town is dead. Ever since the Blue Skull came, he never got to finish his sentence. Mavis shouted in warning, look out behind you. The warning was in vain. A magical bullet was blasted through the old man's belly from behind. "Old man, hey. What happened?" The treasure hunters cried out in worry as they rushed towards the old man, while Mavis glared at a trio of dark mages that were jeering at their target. The one on the far right was holding a smoking staff in the air, clearly the one that fired the shot, and the one on the far left took aim at Mavis with his staff. "Alrighty, I'ma aim for that kid next," the dark mage announced. The group noticed the crests the dark mages bore, Blue Skull, and readied themselves for battle. The dark mages jumped down from their perch, shouting a battle cry and blasting magical bullets at the group from their staffs. The treasure hunters and Mavis scattered to avoid getting hit and then launched their counterattacks. Yuri blasted his opponent away with a crystal bomb while announcing that each of them costs 500 jewels. Money well spent. Prak dispatched his opponent by slapping him around with his bladed chain, and Warod displayed his impressive physical strength by knocking his opponent out with one solid punch. Yuri took a moment to gloat about his victory over a dark mage, but was interrupted by the sound of an oncoming stampede. Mavis decided that this was her moment to step in and said, "There might be a lot of them, but they're still underlings. My illusion magic should be enough to chase them off." Mavis raised her hands into the air and announced, "Come. Ancient soldiers." Mavis's illusion magic did its work and manifested as a legion of armored soldiers with helmets concealing their faces from view. The horde of dark mages immediately halted their advance, intimidated by the legion of soldiers that appeared out of nowhere. Mavis made her demands, "We need to speak with your guildmaster. Now." The dark mages talked amongst themselves, honestly unsure if they should give in to a magical child's demands or stand their ground. It was then that Blue Skull's goggle-wearing guildmaster walked through the ranks of his guild and asked, "What's all the fuss about?" Yuri's response to the guildmaster actually showing up was a mix between shock and excitement. He did not expect the dark guildmaster to just reveal himself so quickly. Mavis, however, glared at guildmaster Jeffrey and said, "You stole something very important from Tenru Island a few years ago. Return it. Now." "And if I refuse?" Jeffrey asked. "Then my legion and I will take it by force. You have no idea what kind of powers you have tampered with. The Tenru Jade must be returned to where it belongs immediately," Mavis concluded. Jeffrey scoffed, "With those troops." He then turned and left, telling his mages to take them down. The dark mages hesitated, fearing the odds that they were facing, but the guildmaster reassured them by informing them that the soldiers were just illusions. Mavis narrowed her eyes as Jeffrey cast Dispel magic, causing her ancient soldiers to vanish. Mavis considered trying to fool them with a different kind of illusion by casting a Jinjutsu on them, since Dispel magic only works on magic-based techniques, not chakra-based ones, but decided against it since the gift she received from her ancestor Minato left her chakra reserves a little difficult to control at the moment. The larger reserves were nice, but it came at the cost of her once finely tuned chakra control, so Jinjutsu would probably be beyond her reach from now on. The dark mages unleashed a battle cry and charged while Prek gave the command to fall back and regroup. Unfortunately, escape would not come easily. The dark mages quickly surrounded the group, forcing them to fight their way out. Mavis weighed her options and decided to make use of her newly enlarged chakra reserves. She formed a clone seal and incanted Shadow Clone Jutsu. 25 solid clones appeared in a puff of smoke and began to engage the dark mages in hand-to-hand combat. Mavis grimaced at the small number and thought, "I didn't put enough chakra into that one. I was aiming for 50, but I guess I can work with this." Mavis ducked under a volley of magical bullets and prepared her next trick. White light began to gather in her right hand and she took aim at the nearest dark mage. However, her attention was diverted when Jeffrey grabbed a crystal bomb that Yuri threw at him and sent it back. Mavis diverted her aim at Jeffrey's proximity and launched her orb of light above Jeffrey. When the orb suspended itself above Jeffrey, Mavis incanted Ray, causing the orb to disperse into multiple rays of deadly light that impacted any dark mages that tried to stick close to their guild master. The technique would have hit Jeffrey too if he didn't cast a dispel field right before one of the deadly rays of light could hit him. Jeffrey made an interesting observation that made him set his sights on Mavis. His dispel field did not force her clones to disperse, only physical force was proving to be capable of eliminating the clones. They appeared to be both solid and comprised of something other than magic. Jeffrey realized that Mavis was a threat to him and decided that he needed to eliminate her. He picked up a staff from one of his underlings and used it to fire a magical bullet at her. Mavis, however, was on her guard and deflected the bullet by backhanding it into the ground. She glared at Jeffrey and was about to retaliate, but then noticed both Yuri and Precht were down and Warod was trying to retreat with them under his arms. Deciding that her friends took priority over the battle, Mavis decided to cover Warod's escape. She bit into her thumb with one of her oddly elongated canine teeth and formed the hand seals necessary for the summoning technique. She slammed her hands on the ground and a puff of smoke enveloped the area. Jeffrey tried to dispel this technique as well, only for his attempts to amount to nothing. The smoke cleared, and a toad half the size of a two-story house in a green vest appeared with Mavis on its head. Mavis asked the toad, "Gamashiki, I need your help holding off these dark mages, can you do that?" Gamashiki nodded, brandished a large spiked club, and brought it down on Jeffrey, forcing him to dive out of the way. Mavis used this opportunity to make her own escape. She jumped off Gamashiki's head and landed on a rooftop. She then covered her friend's escape by firing rays of light from her hands at all dark mages that got in Warad's way while chasing after him on the rooftops. Gamashiki reverse summoned himself back to Mount Mayaboku when he saw that his summoner was out of harm's way. Jeffrey then called for his mages to stop chasing the mage and treasure hunters, telling them that they are no longer a threat. While this happened, Mavis's cloaked observer took her leave, following the group that retreated. Unbeknownst to all parties in the recent conflict, including Mavis's observer, there was one more person spectating the conflict. If it could even be called a person. A humanoid shadow observed the conclusion of the conflict, narrowing its solid yellow eyes at the descendant of Shinobi. It growled to itself, "I recognize you, child. You are the child of that Uzumaki I exterminated 9 years ago. The yellow flash is not here to save you this time, and your protector, North Swain, is not here to protect you either. The shinobi are all but extinct. You are just one of a handful that I still need to hunt down." The shadow noticed a quick blur of movement and recognized the chakra signature of Madara's only successful deserter. "It looks like today is my lucky day. I have located not just a surviving shinobi descendant but also that deserter from Master Madara's resurrected shinobi squad. Now I can succeed where I failed 9 years ago and reapply a control seal to that deserter at the same time. You have escaped me many times in the past, but your luck has run out, Sakura Haruno. You will not escape me this time." Forest outside Magnolia. The atmosphere of the campground was one of depression and failure. Yuri was unconscious and his chest was heavily bandaged while Warad and Mavis watched over him. Precht was wounded too, he lost his right eye to one of Blue Skull's magical bullets. Mavis soon left to get some water, leaving the 2 conscious and 1 unconscious men to their own devices. They talked about how they needed a doctor, but they had no means of getting one due to the only town in a few miles being occupied by Blue Skull. As Mavis gathered water for her and her friends, her observer decided that it was time to make her presence known. The woman asked, "You appear to be lost in thought. Does it have anything to do with what happened in Magnolia?" Mavis turned around in surprise, dropping the bucket she was carrying. Nobody had ever succeeded in sneaking up on her due to her highly attuned senses, so she knew that this was a person that she absolutely needed to take seriously. "Were you following my friends and me?" "Yes, sorry about that, but I noticed something interesting about you that I felt I needed to investigate," the mysterious woman said. "What is it that you noticed about me?" "I'll admit that I'm a prodigy with magic. I'm not ashamed about that, but other than that, I'm just a normal girl." The woman said, "I'll elaborate on my findings then. You can create solid clones that dispel magic cannot affect, and you summoned a toad from Mount Mayaboku. Most people would just consider that unique magic, but I know better. No matter how unique the magic might be, dispel magic would still negate or at least weaken whatever you cast. That could only mean that what you performed back in Magnolia, excluding the light spells, was not magic. You are a very unique person, Mavis. There are not many people left in the world that can use chakra, and even fewer can use both chakra and magic." Mavis was now very curious about this stranger. There were not many people in the world that still believed in the existence of chakra, and even fewer could recognize it. Mavis asked, "Who are you? How did you know that the toad I summoned was from Mount Mayaboku? No, better yet, how do you even know about Mount Mayaboku?" The woman gave Mavis a rueful smile, removed her hood to reveal her long pink hair that reached the middle of her back, green eyes, and blue diamond mark on her forehead, and said, "Sorry, how rude of me to not introduce myself. You may call me Medic. I've thrown my real name away a long time ago. The only thing left of me is my occupation in the world. You don't have anything to fear from me, I'm a healer, not a fighter, though I can fight if I absolutely have to. As for how I know about the toads. An old friend of mine was a toad summoner a long time ago." Mavis was now very curious. Her ancestor, Minato, was proof enough that there were a few living remnants of the era of shinobi running around. Even if Minato may not technically count as a living remnant, and now this medic was implying that she was alive in that era as well. There's nothing else she could have been implying. The last toad summoner before her was Naruto Uzumaki, and he has not been active since the conclusion of the era of shinobi. Medic could see the gears turning in Mavis's head and gave a knowing smile. "This girl has a sharp mind. It looks like she's already figured out that I'm a lot older than I look. Until now, there has not been a toad summoner since Naruto, so she's probably already figured out that I'm a shinobi, or at least I once was." Mavis decided to test a theory that she formed in her head and asked, "If you were alive back during that era, did you ever encounter the Shinju?" Medic smirked approvingly, Mavis's shift to speaking in Shinobi-ese being all the proof she needed to know that Mavis had figured out what she was. Yes, I helped fight it. Mavis asked, are all the stories about its power accurate? Medic sighed, no, it's even more powerful than what the stories tell. When you were talking to your friends while traveling to Magnolia you talked about the Shinju, what is its connection to the Tenri Jade? Why are you fighting Blue Skull? Mavis switched back to the modern language and answered, the Tenri Jade is what is known as a chakra transfer gem. It is a vital component in the Shinju's sealing and transfer process between its sealing grounds and future eternal prison. Blue Skull stole it while its guardian was busy investigating one of the Magic Council's shadier projects. If the Tenru Jade is not returned by the end of the month, the seal will completely fall apart along with the transfer process, regardless of my ancestor's efforts to hold the seal together by himself. Medic's eyes widened in shock, the decision that her friend came to after she was forced to leave him dawned her, so that's the path that he chose. He sealed himself away to keep the Shinju from causing any more destruction. Then a part of Mavis's explanation captured Medic's attention. Wait, ancestor. Who's holding the seal together in place of the Tenru Jade? Minato Namikaze. Would you know him better as the fourth Hokage? Mavis asked. Mavis's statement threw Medic for a loop, she's descended from the fourth Hokage. Wait, Naruto once mentioned right before the war that he was the fourth son, so that would make her Naruto's descendant. This explains why I'm seeing a few similarities between the two of them, though this girl is way smarter than him. Medic sighed and said, I can't say I ever knew him, but I did know of him. He was one of Konoha's greatest heroes and feared by his enemies as the Yellow Flash. Mavis started to get gleefully aggressive with her questions, now knowing that her new acquaintance is a treasure trove of ancient knowledge that she might never find anywhere else. What was it like at the end of the era of Shinobi? How did it end? Medic answered, I grew up during the era's last brief period of peace, so my childhood was probably not much different from what an average girl would experience today. Some kids were mean to me, but I made a friend that I sometimes got into fights with over boys. When I became a shinobi, I was put on a team with Sasuke Uchiha and Naruto Uzumaki under a sensei named Kakashi Haddock. It was 3 years after I became a shinobi that everything changed. A criminal organization called Akatsuki hunted down and captured the tailed beasts in an object known as the demonic statue of the outer path. We fought back, and I personally took down one of them myself, but it was when only 2 of them were left when things got bad. The leader of the remaining 2 claimed to be Madara Uchiha and declared war on the entire shinobi world in an attempt to capture the only 2 tailed beasts he had yet to obtain, the 8 tails and the 9 tails, and he was well enough prepared to show that he was not joking around. The war hit its climax when the Akatsuki's collaborator, a man named Kabuto Yakushi, used a technique called the Impure World Resurrection to revive the real Madara Uchiha as an undead warrior, and the man that was just pretending to be Madara managed to revive the Shinju without absorbing the 8 and 9 tails into the demonic statue of the outer path. That was when everything truly went to hell. My sensei, Kakashi, and the fake Madara were warped away by the fake Madara's space-time technique and never returned, and then Madara lost control of the Shinju. It managed to get a hold of the 8 tails living container, its Jinchuriki, absorbed its power, and went berserk, creating cataclysms that spread across the entire continent. It became a natural disaster so terrible that it probably had a higher death toll than any single war could ever hope to accomplish. I don't really know what happened after that. I barely managed to survive long enough to see Naruto launch his last-ditch effort to stop the Shinju. I don't know what happened after that, but the stories I heard and the current situation tell me that he sealed the beast within himself to save the world. Mavis listened to Medic's story with rapt attention. She hung on to her every word and already had a new question lined up. From the sound of things, you didn't survive the war. How are you here now? Madara managed to escape the carnage, and it turns out that all the events that resulted in that war were orchestrated by him from beyond the grave. Since his resurrection left him immortal, he used his infinite amount of time to come up with a new way to continue his Moon's Eye plan. It was around the year X350 that I returned to the picture. When magic rose to prominence, Madara learned how to tap into magic and delved into the black arts. He used a branch of the black arts called living magic to give himself an uniging, but alive, body. He then proceeded to use the Impure World Resurrection technique to do the same. A few people he managed to get a DNA sample of. I was one of those people. He then imprisoned us with a control seal that forced us to obey his commands. I managed to break free sometime later, but I'd rather not talk about the events surrounding that time. Mavis took a moment to digest this information. The Shinju was not the only dark shadow of the past that she'll have to contend with. So long as Madara lurked in the shadows, the threat of the Shinju's release will always loom on the horizon. Mavis asked, why are you telling me all this? Medic smiled. It was probably the first genuine smile she ever experienced in centuries, because you've inherited a gift from my old teammate, your ancestor, and I'm not talking about the 9 tails. Mavis's eyes widened in surprise when Medic said that. There was always just something about him that made people want to put their faith in him. A deep voice echoed in Mavis's head, she's not wrong. That knucklehead may be an idiot, but he's a charismatic idiot. He even managed to get me to let go of my hatred and put my faith in him. Mavis pointed at Medic and stammered out, how did you find out about Kurama? All Prect, Warod, and Yuri know is that Minato gave me a chakra-based gift that would allow me to resist getting possessed by the Tenru Jade. How did you know that gift was the Nine Tails? Medic chuckled at Mavis's spaz moment, reminded of Naruto's spaz moments and answered, I learned how to sense chakra over the last few centuries. I might never be able to sense chakra as well as a natural sensor, but my senses were still finely tuned enough to notice that you have a secondary source of chakra flowing through you. Only Jinchuriki have a secondary chakra source. Also, I've felt the Nine Tails chakra before when Naruto used it during the Fourth Great Shinobi War. That's how I recognized the presence of the Nine Tails chakra. Now, are you planning on telling me about how the Nine Tails is supposed to help you resist getting possessed by the Tenru Jade? How could it even do that? Mavis petulantly answered, his name is Kurama. Please call him by his name, not his title. Medic nodded apologetically. Mavis continued, as for the Tenru Jade. It was something Minato discovered one time when he touched the jade by accident. He felt a malevolent presence invade his mind and attempt to take over. It might have succeeded if he didn't have Kurama's yin half sealed within him. That's why Minato extracted Kurama's yang half from the Shinju sealing chamber and sealed him in me. Having an extra mind in the same body makes possession from an outside force nearly impossible because it would be one mind battling against two for dominance. Medic sighed sadly, I can see why being a Jinchuriki is necessary for your success in this mission, but I can't help but feel sad for you. Jinchuriki have never lived easy lives back during the era of shinobi. Some villages treated them as ultimate weapons, and others loathed their very existence, only tolerating them as a living war deterrent. Being the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails was one of Naruto's greatest sources of pain for most of his life. You can't really back out of this now, but are you sure you can handle this? Kurama quipped in Mavis's head, she's not wrong. Maybe, but I can handle it. It's not like being a Jinchuriki is a bad thing. For one, I'll never have to be alone again. You'll always be with me, right, Kurama? I don't really have a choice at this point, but you're not the worst person to be sealed inside of. I can handle it. Mavis responded with a bright smile. Kurama and I get along just fine, and I can feel in my heart that Prect, Warod, and Yuri won't think differently of me when I finally tell them. Medic sighed, speaking of them, how exactly do you plan on keeping them alive when you face off with Blue Skull again? If they're as good friends as you say they are, then they won't just let you confront Blue Skull alone. Yuri nearly died from having one of his bombs thrown back at him, and Prect lost an eye. They might not be so lucky next time. Mavis closed her eyes in thought, trying to come up with a plan of action. She had a month left to return the Tenru Jade to the Shinju seal to prevent its revival, and that's thinking optimistically. Prect, Warod, and Yuri were good fighters, but Blue Skull had magic on its side. What they needed was a little something extra to add to their arsenal, something that would allow them to fight the dark mages on equal footing. Mavis returned her intelligent gaze to Medic and asked, how much do you know about magical theory? Medic blinked and answered, a lot actually, my firstborn son was an even bigger prodigy than you when it came to magic. I never bothered to learn how to use magic myself, but I did learn enough to know how to teach people how to use it by skimming through some of his textbooks. Why? What are you planning? Mavis grinned mischievously, my plan starts with you doing exactly what your name implies. A week passed after Mavis's meeting with Medic. Medic used the first day to heal Prect and Yuri's wounds, though Prect's eye proved to be unsalvageable. The second day was spent with Medic explaining magical theory to the three treasure hunters, how to awaken their inherent magic, should they possess the ability to use it, and how to use it. The following week was spent teaching the treasure hunters turned mages how to control their magic. Yuri, unsurprisingly, had an inherent affinity for lighting magic. It was fitting due to his love for flashy things. Prect had an affinity for multiple kinds of magic, but settled on two that would be the most time efficient for him to learn at the moment before trying to branch out. He spent the week mastering chain magic and bullet magic. Chain magic since he already knows how to use chains, except the magical ones that he can now create bend to his will instead of the will of physics, and bullet magic because all he has to do to use it is charge his magic at his fingertips, aim, and fire. Borod's was much more interesting. His inherent magic was green magic, the ability to manipulate nature. Medic took the time to explain that while green magic is not inherently offensive, it can be if Warod gets imaginative enough with his abilities. Mavis spent the majority of week focusing on mastering the technique that her ancestor Minato explained and showed to her with a shadow clone. The Rasengan. She managed to shatter the rubber ball on the fifth day after some advice from Medic, who had seen the Rasengan enough times to know that the chakra needed to create the Rasengan needed to be incredibly dense and focused. Unfortunately, the final step of putting steps 1 and 2 together eluded Mavis for the remainder of the week. She concluded that her chakra was still too difficult to control at the moment for her to have the necessary chakra control needed to create a complete Rasengan. She'll have to wait until after her body has fully acclimated to Kurama's chakra for her to master the Rasengan. It was after she mastered the second step of the Rasengan that she investigated the state of Magnolia Town. She did not like what she saw. Blue Skull forced the villagers to pay unreasonable taxes, and food was distributed in small numbers, causing many people to starve. This resulted in Mavis having a prophetic nightmare the following night. This one was different from the ones that have been haunting her every other night, however. This one had nothing to do with the Shinju. In it, she saw the citizens of Magnolia Town slowly starving to death and occasionally being publicly executed. She also noticed that the Tenru Jade was gone in that dream. Mavis rationalized that it was a vision of a future where they succeeded in stealing the Tenru Jade and returning it to the Shinju sealing grounds, but did not defeat Blue Skull. The vision on top of what she saw in Magnolia Town made her realize that she wanted to focus on more than just her mission to retrieve the Tenru Jade. She wanted to save Magnolia Town. When she informed her friends about her decision, Yuri was not enthused. Flashback, huh? You want to free the town? Yuri asked. Mavis answered, yes, I can't just sit back and watch them suffer. Yuri was not amused, no way, count me out if you're planning on being some hero. Our job is to sneak into Blue Skull, steal the Tenru Jade, and put it back where it belongs. Taking down an entire dark guild is not a part of that job description. Prek disagreed, Yuri, we've obtained magic so that we could fight them on even ground. Now is the time for us to use it. Yuri wasted no time getting in Prek's face and shouted, don't get all cocky with me just because you're Medic's favorite student. We're amateurs that haven't even been using magic for a full week. There are a few hundred professionals. Warad snarked, so you're afraid of getting your ass kicked? Yuri took offense to that, but Warad continued before he could say anything, we've seen a lot of towns like this before. There was nothing we could have done back then, but now we do have the means to make a difference. Tell me, don't you think that we should at least give it a shot? Yuri had no response to that, and Medic broke the brief silence by saying, I don't really care one way or the other what happens to Magnolia. If you want to help, I'll join in. If you'd rather focus on your mission, I'll do what I can to help there too. I don't really care how we get the Tenru Jade back to where it belongs, just so long as it is returned before it's too late. So, what'll it be, Mavis? Mavis closed her eyes in thought and formulated a plan, asking her partner, Kurama, for second opinions on her plan, before finally opening her eyes and announcing, I've come up with a plan. Flashback end, that was 3 days ago. According to the information Mavis gathered while investigating the town, Jeffrey occasionally goes hunting in the mountains north of Magnolia. The group used this opportunity to attack the guild while its master was away and neutralize the guild master at the same time. The group split into 2 teams, Prekt, Yuri, and Medic were responsible for seizing the guild hall of Cardia Cathedral and capturing every dark mage they could. Which was surprisingly more time-consuming than difficult as Yuri was expecting, which went to prove that mooks with magic were still just mooks when their opponents were fighting them on a level playing field. Orad's job was to lead Jeffrey to Mavis, where she would spring a trap that she had prepared for Blue Skull's master. Once Jeffrey was incapacitated, Warad and Mavis would reunite with the rest of the group and make a final push to rid Magnolia Town of the Blue Skull Dark Guild. Then Mavis would take the Tenru Jade back to its rightful place, as she is the only one capable of doing so. Jeffrey immediately noticed something was wrong right before Warad commanded the trees themselves to assault him, his mount, and the few underlings that he brought with him. Luckily for the underlings, the assault was just to grab their attention. Jeffrey demanded that Warad reveal himself, and Warad was all too happy to comply. We've captured your base in Cardia Cathedral. All the treasure in it is now ours. Warad gloated. Jeffrey recognized Warad and said, oh, so you've learned how to use magic. Does this mean you're here for revenge? Warad smirked, nah, I don't care about revenge. Warad trailed off on purpose, giving a Blue Skull underling time to let Jeffrey know that Magnolia Town was on fire. He then used this moment to make his escape. Jeffrey ordered his underlings to pursue Warad while he raced back to Magnolia. However, he and his mount came to an abrupt halt half a mile outside the town. Jeffrey tried to move and tried to nullify whatever paralyzing him with his dispel magic, only for it to do nothing but reveal that Magnolia Town was not really on fire. Jeffrey looked down and noticed that an array of black runes had spread across his body and he did not recognize any of the symbols. The shinobi art of sealing. Fuinjutsu. I'm sure you've already found out that your dispel magic is useless against it. That's because there is no magic in it for you to dispel. Mavis explained as she appeared before Jeffrey. Jeffrey growled at Mavis in anger, you again. What are you? This is the 3rd technique you've used that my magic has failed to dispel. What is this? What are you? Mavis explained, I am a descendant of the ancient shinobi. You could not dispel my shadow clones, summon Toad, and this seal because they were called forth by a power called chakra, not magic. As such, your dispel magic had no effect because dispel magic only affects magic, not chakra. Since you do not have a chakra system capable of molding chakra, you will be stuck here for the next 3 hours. Now if you'll excuse me, I must retrieve the Tenru Jade. Jeffrey suddenly became fearful and warned Mavis about the true nature of the Tenru Jade. Mavis brushed him off and informed him that she already knew that and has already taken the necessary precautions to resist the evil force resting in the gem. Cardia Cathedral. Mavis and Warad met up with the rest of the group and found Medic tending to the few cuts and bruises that Precht and Yuri received from battling Blue Skull's underlings. Medic nodded at Mavis and jerked her head towards the Tenru Jade, resting on an altar in the back of the cathedral. Mavis approached the jade, only for it to surprise everyone in the room by floating into the air of its own accord and releasing a terrifying amount of malevolent energy. Then a voice reverberated throughout the cathedral in ancient shinobiese, the voice of a very hateful woman. You. I recognize you. Mana. You will pay for destroying all I worked so hard to achieve. I will exterminate you. You and everyone you have associated yourself with. I shall exterminate you all. Yuri covered his ears to block out the incredibly loud voice and asked, Mavis, do you have any idea what this voice is saying? Mavis responded, just the standard evil spirit stuff. Blaming me for whatever made her become evil and declarations of mass murder. Though she got my name wrong, so I guess I must look like someone the Shinju really hates. The Tenru Jade rose further into the air, beyond Mavis's reach when she tried to make a grab for it. It exited the cathedral through an opening in the roof and perched itself on the forehead of the dragon statue that Blue Skull named itself after. The group rushed outside to pursue the possessed gem and froze in shock of what the gem was doing. Flesh was growing on the dragon effigy and the skeletal wings began to grow a membrane strong enough to allow it flight once more. Blue scales emerged from the skeleton's new flesh while tan scales covered its underbelly and vertically slitted yellow eyes appeared in its eye sockets. The revived dragon raised its head skyward, exhaled a massive gout of azure flames into the sky and announced, I have returned from the abyss of death. I am the Lord of Blue Flames. I am Tiamat. Tiamat looked down at the group of 5, revealing the Tenru Jade embedded in his forehead, and pointed at the group, you 5 you shall be my first victims. I have not eaten in so long, so the 5 of you should be a decent appetizer before I feast on this town. Every single person in the town immediately began to evacuate in a panic. The group responded with varying emotions ranging from fear to grim resolve. Yuri was the first to speak and fearfully squeaked, we need to run. Now. Where exactly can we run to? That's a freaking dragon for crying out loud. Is it even possible to escape? Warad responded. I cannot retreat, Mavis quietly said as she surprised Precht, Yuri and Warad by actually walking toward Tiamat. Medic already had a good idea of what was going through Mavis's head. They needed to retrieve the Tenru Jade to prevent the return of a beast far more powerful than this dragon. There was too much at stake for her to run away. Yuri grabbed Mavis by the shoulder and tried pull her back, now's not the time for heroics Mavis. That's a real live dragon. We need to get out of here while we still can. Mavis shrugged off Yuri's grip and responded while Tiamat watched patiently, waiting for his meals to redirect their attention back to it, I know what we're up against. Which is why I want you, Precht and Warad to get the townspeople as far away from here as you can. I will not run from this fight. The world is doomed if I cannot return the Tenru Jade to where it belongs. If I am to do that, I must defeat this dragon. Precht joined in, then let us help you. We'd stand a much better chance together than you would by yourself. Mavis shook her head, if this was a normal fight, you would be correct, but this is far from normal. If dragons are as strong as the legend said, then the 3 of you would not last 5 seconds against it, even if you did work together. Borad asked, then what makes you think you would do any better? Mavis directed her attention towards Tiamat and continued her walk towards the Lord of Blue Flames, because my offensive magic was made for this. The group heard the sound of a massive impact and saw that Medic was now crouched in the middle of a crater with her fist in the ground. They also saw a humanoid figure composed completely of shadows standing at the edge of the crater. Medic and the figure glared at each other with clear hostility visible on both sides before Medic launched a series of physical strikes, leaving small craters in her wake with every strike that hit the ground that forced the shadow being to retreat into the cathedral. It was then that Tiamat lost his patience and shouted, stop ignoring me. Tiamat punctuated his statement by breathing a massive stream of blue fire that the 4 teenagers could not hope to dodge. Then Mavis did something that left Precht, Yuri and Warad dumbfounded. She inhaled through her mouth and began to eat the flames as the attack redirected itself into Mavis's mouth. The treasure hunters continued to hear slurping sounds come from Mavis as she continued to eat the flames until the attack ended. She then surprised her friends again, including the dragon, by opening her mouth and unleashing a massive beam of white light just as large as Tiamat's breath attack while shouting, Divine Dragon's Roar. The attack slammed into Tiamat dead on in the face and knocked him onto his back. Mavis turned to her friends briefly and said, "My offensive magic is a lost magic known as Divine Dragon Slayer magic. I don't want to see any of you get hurt, and I'm the only one among us that is capable of fighting a dragon with any hope of success. Please, let me handle this." The three hesitated for a moment before Prek solemnly said, "Don't die, Mavis." Mavis nodded, "I won't." She then started to tear up, "I have too much to live for. I can't afford to die now that I finally have friends." Tiamat got back onto his 4 feet as Mavis's friends left to help evacuate the townspeople. Mavis gave Tiamat her undivided attention as he growled in irritation, "A dragon slayer, that explains your confidence in the face of a dragon, but no matter. Your next attack will only have your puny power backing it up. I will not give you another opportunity to borrow some of my power. You will face your grim fate alone." Mavis dodged Tiamat's charging attack with a chakra-enhanced leap, accidentally channeling too much, launching herself higher into the air than she wanted. She mentally asked, "Kurama, how much longer will I have to wait until my chakra has fully adjusted to yours and stabilizes? I won't last long against Tiamat without your help and my chakra being unpredictable. 30 minutes. Surely you can last that long against something you've been trained to slay, right?" Kurama responded. "I can manage for that long," Mavis thought to Kurama as she prepared a flying axe kick. Tiamat flapped his wings and prepared to pursue Mavis, only for her flying axe kick infused with Divine Dragon Slayer magic to hit its mark at the back of his neck as Mavis shouted, "Divine Dragon's Holy Fang." The impact forced Tiamat back to the ground, but more irritated him than hurt him. Tiamat attempted to grab Mavis with his right claw, but she batted it away with a magic-infused fist as she descended to the ground while incanting, "Divine Dragon's Exalted Fist." Tiamat grunted with irritation and attempted to ram and impale Mavis with a small horn on his nose, but narrowly missed when Mavis dodged with another chakra-enhanced leap to her left, this time accidentally channeling too little chakra into her jump. Tiamat capitalized on the closeness and his size and leaned his neck and head to the right as quickly as he could, smacking Mavis away with the right side of his head. Mavis landed with a thud and quickly flipped back onto her bare feet as Tiamat charged her. She thought to Kurama as she narrowly dodged Tiamat's charge and countered with another exalted fist, "How much longer?" 29 minutes. Mavis thought to herself as she braced herself for another round with Tiamat, "This is going to be a long 29 minutes." Prek helped an old lady get back on her feet while Yuri and Warad aided the townspeople as well. Prek looked back and saw Tiamat get hit in the face by a large ray of light, forcing him to reel backwards before retaliating by slamming his front legs into the ground. Prek thought as he helped the elderly woman get to safety, "There has to be a way for us to help Mavis. Dragon Slayer or not, she's still a 13-year-old girl. A tough girl, but still a little girl. I believe that she can hold her own against Tiamat, but it doesn't change how I feel. There has to be some way we can help." Prek watched as Tiamat jazzed Mavis into the woods behind Cardia Cathedral and got an idea. "Borad. Yuri." Prek shouted to his friends as he escorted the elderly lady to the town gates. "What?" they both asked as they helped calm down and escort townspeople as far away from the battle between Dragon and Dragon Slayer as possible. "We're going back to help Mavis as soon as this area is cleared." "Right," was their unified response. They didn't need to say anything more than that because they were all thinking the same thing. "You called us your friends, Mavis, and as your friends, we don't want you to get hurt either. We will fight this dragon together." Medic missed smashing the moving shadow's face in again and avoided its counterattack by jumping away from its attempt to grab her face. She questioned the shadow, "Why are you here, Black Zetsu?" Black Zetsu spread its arms and responded, "To ensure the Shinju's release, of course. After all, I am the one that orchestrated the Tenru Jade's theft. However, since you and that shinobi descendant are here too, your capture and her death have been added to my to-do list. Getting those 2 tasks done will give me great pleasure due to your repeated escapes from me over the past few centuries and the yellow flash narrowly saving that child from death by my hand 9 years ago." Medic narrowed her eyes and spat out, "So you're the one that murdered Mavis's parents." Black Zetsu gave Medic a jagged toothed grin and preened, "Correct. It was only her mother that truly needed to die, her maiden name being Uzumaki being proof enough of that. Technically, her father didn't need to die, but he knew too much, so I killed him just to make sure he'd keep quiet." Black Zetsu then frowned and ranted, "I would have killed the girl then too if that damned 4th Hokage hadn't been passing through at the time. Not that she'd remember that part since she was unconscious at the time. I would have just killed her the next time I tracked her down, but as it turns out, the yellow flash left her in the care of the thrice-damned divine dragon North Swain. He watched over her like a mother hen and made sure I could never get anywhere near striking distance of her. Not that I'm surprised, given her uncanny resemblance to Mana, the only other student he ever taught his magic to. I wouldn't be surprised if she was a distant descendant of her or even her reincarnation. Both are possible considering her foresight ability." Medic took a step back and thought, "Mana. That's what the spirit in the Tenru Jade called Mavis. She then narrowed her eyes and asked, why are you hunting down shinobi descendants? Black Zetsu grinned again and explained, isn't it obvious? It's what Master Madara ordered me to do. Not that you would remember him giving me that order. He gave that order to me a century before he used the impure world resurrection on you, Sakura Haruno. Medic growled and glared at Black Zetsu, don't call me that. I've thrown that name away. Black Zetsu chuckled malevolently, then would you prefer that in disguise surname that you gave yourself when you Black Zetsu was cut off by a blast of compressed air that sent him flying through a wall and out of the cathedral. Medic returned her extended fist to her side and snarled to herself, I'm going to enjoy reducing him to a greasy smear on my fist, far more than I should. Medic pursued Black Zetsu, determined to put an end to the abomination. Magnolia Forest. Half a mile away from Cardia Cathedral. Kurama, how much time? 3 minutes, and I must say that you are doing much better than I expected you to. You've managed to keep that overgrown lizard from landing a completely solid hit on you the entire time. Those dodging lessons you told me about must really be paying off. Kurama said as Mavis jumped out of the way of an open-mouthed charge, forcing Tiamat to bite into a tree. However, Tiamat used a tree as a weapon and started swinging it at Mavis by shaking his head, eventually landing a solid hit on Mavis with the tree. Luckily, she minimized the damage by curling up into a ball to protect her face and torso, only suffering from a few stick cuts to her arms and legs and blunt force trauma from the impact and landing. Kurama said, whoops, looks like I jinxed her. You alright, kid? Mavis mentally slurred, did anyone get the number of that birch? I think it was an oak, Kurama joked in response. Thank you, Mavis dazedly replied. You're welcome, now snap out of it. You've got an incoming dragon at 12 o'clock. Kurama mentally slapped her back to her senses just in time for her to jump onto the trunk of the tree Tiamat was swinging at her and put her right hand in a knife hand position. I haven't had much of a chance to practice this one, but it's my only shot at getting rid of this tree. Mavis channeled her Dragon Slayer magic into her hand and manifested it as a sharp white blade of light. She was thrown from the tree trunk as the blade formed since she could not cling to the tree with her chakra and use magic at the same time. Mavis landed on her feet and braced herself for Tiamat's next swing. When it came, she cleaved through the section that was about to hit her and incanted, Divine Dragon Sacred Sword. Tiamat swung again and was met with the same result. He then got one last use out of the tree by spitting what was left of the trunk at Mavis, which she cleaved into so that the two halves would land behind her in two pieces instead of on her. Mavis then made use of her acrobatics to slash at Tiamat in a confusing pattern, forcing him to back away and dodge to the best of his ability. Which was not easy considering his size, and his size proved to be his undoing when Mavis showed Tiamat just how sharp the Divine Dragon Sacred Sword is by slashing him across his forehead just below the Tenru Jade, cutting through the scales as if they were flesh and drawing blood. Tiamat thrashed in pain and threw Mavis into a bush. He glared down at her as she removed herself from the foliage and assumed a defensive position. Tiamat acknowledged Mavis as an actual threat and asked, you call yourself the Divine Dragon Slayer, correct? Who taught you this magic? North Swain, the divine dragon was Mavis's response. North Swain, eh? How did you run into that old fossil? He's an extreme isolationist that doesn't even associate with his own kind, much less humans. The only way anyone could ever hope to find him would be to happen upon him by accident or if he seeks you out. I woke up on his mountain after my parents were killed. I don't know how I got there. Mavis answered as she created another divine dragon sacred sword. I see, so it was by accident. Since you have proven that hold the supreme dragon slayer magic, I shall engage you as if you were a serious threat to my life. Underestimating a student of the one powerful enough to be known as the god of all dragons would be foolish. Kurama. I could really use a stable chakra system and your help right about now. Mavis mentally yelled as Tiamat took flight in preparation of a dive bomb attack. Kurama's reply was, just a few more seconds. Tiamat descended from the skies at high speeds at Mavis as she prepared to perform a dodging slash. 3. Kurama counted. Tiamat bit down on air and passed Mavis, using the shockwave of his flying pass to blow Mavis out of his way, thwarting her counterattack. 2. Tiamat turned and prepared a second dive bomb run. 1. Mavis felt her formerly chaotic chakra reserve settle down and channeled her chakra into her feet. She launched herself into the air and completely avoided Tiamat's dive bomb run and the shockwave. Tiamat then made to pluck her out of the air, but was stopped by a black high-speed humanoid projectile, hitting him in the side of the face. This jarred his focus and knocked him out of the sky, while Mavis had a graceful landing. Mavis turned in the direction the projectile came from and saw Medic running towards her. Mavis met her halfway and said, Medic. I'm so glad you're alright. Medic smiled and said, it's good to see that you've been holding yourself together too. Even if you look like you lost a fight with a wood chipper. Mavis noticed the condition of her clothes and put a sheepish look on her face. She then shifted her focus back on Tiamat and noticed that the black humanoid that Medic used as an impromptu cannonball was vanishing into the ground until it eventually vanished completely while Tiamat regained his bearings. Mavis asked, "What was that?" Medic answered, "Black Zetsu, believe me when I say that you'll want a piece of it just as much as I do when I tell you about its more recent exploits." Mavis nodded and prepared to renew her assault on Tiamat when another surprise happened. The tree sprung to life and pinned him to the ground. Then magical chains burst from the ground to add to the restraints holding Tiamat down. Mavis looked to the source of the new magical output and was shocked when she saw Warad, Precht, and Yuri. Precht. Warad. Yuri. "What are you three doing here?" Mavis demanded in surprise. Yuri responded, "We're your friends, right? Did you really think that we'd just sit back and let you fight a dragon by yourself?" Warad added, "The townspeople are a safe distance away from here, so there's no need for us to stay on the sidelines anymore." Precht finished, with his hands planted on the ground, "We'll distract and restrain Tiamat, you just focus on pulling the Tenru Jade out of its skull." "You guys," Mavis whispered as she smiled and teared up, touched by their devotion to her. Medic stood next to her and put a hand on the girl's shoulder. Medic mused, when people see someone working harder than them, they feel the need to work twice as hard to outdo the one inspiring them. That's just part of what makes people who they are. Mavis's friends all smiled at her, filling her with warmth and happiness. She gained a confident smirk and declared, "Right. It's time to slay a dragon." Tiamat broke through his restraints with a roar of exertion and moved to glare at the newcomers, only to find Yuri balancing on a tree branch in his face, with his arms outstretched in front of him. Yuri incanted, "Lightning flash." Lightning sprung from Yuri's hands and flashed before Tiamat's eyes at point-blank range, blinding the dragon. While Tiamat roared in shock, trees and chains began to restrain him again, while Mavis leaped up to Tiamat's head and grabbed the Tenru Jade. With a shout of exertion, she pulled it out of its place on Tiamat's head. However, the fight would not end that easily. The Tenru Jade had a mind of its own. It flared its malevolent chakra, forcing Mavis to briefly see images of a life that did not belong to her, forced its way out of Mavis's grip, and levitated itself back onto Tiamat's forehead. Tiamat thrashed in rage, throwing Mavis off his head. His vision returned and prepared to retaliate. However, he was interrupted by a searing pain flaring up just below his neck. Medic leaped and landed a chakra-enhanced punch just below Tiamat's. She shouted in exertion, "Shanaro," and used her punch to launch Tiamat out of his restraints and an impressive quarter-mile away from the group. Mavis, Precht, Yuri, and Warad all stared at Medic in dumb shock as she congratulated herself, "Yep, I've still got it." Her self-congratulations were interrupted by Tiamat's roar of rage, which garnered the attention of everything in a mile radius. Mavis then leaped in front of Medic and intercepted a massive wall of blue flames, eating the fire and taking in its power. Mavis was about to return fire with the power she took in when she heard Kurama's voice, "Wait, instead of using that power to return fire, try absorbing it. I have a theory about dragon slayers that I want to confirm." Mavis followed Kurama's advice as Tiamat approached from the air and added the absorbed flames to her supply of energy, unknowingly mixing the ether nano taken in from the flames with her physical and spiritual energies. Her physical features began to change slightly, some of her skin was covered by aquamarine scales, her green eyes developed a slit pupil, and her hair color changed from blonde to a shimmering white. Tiamat attempted to flatten Mavis with a dive bomb punch but was shocked when Mavis responded with equal force. Divine Dragon's exalted fist. Tiamat was pushed back into the air as Mavis skidded across the ground. Kurama grinned in Mavis's mindscape and said, "Looks like my theory was right. Dragon slayers can subconsciously control natural energy when it is drawn in and internalized." "Wait, are you saying that I'm in sage mode right now?" Mavis thought of Kurama. "Technically, yes. Though I believe the dragon slayer term for it would be called Dragonverse." Mavis took a moment to take stock of her new power, while Tiamat took care to avoid Medic and the restraining chains and trees that tried to recapture him. She could feel the ether nano intermingling with her chakra perfectly and could channel both at the same time. Her chakra control also saw astonishing improvement as she attempted to form a Rasengan and performed the final step with no difficulty. Mavis grinned and said, "I could get used to this." Mavis used her newfound power to leap into the air and got in Tiamat's face with a blur of movement. She channeled her dragon slayer magic into her Rasengan and it grew slightly and began to shine with a brilliant white light, nearly blinding Tiamat. Mavis slammed her new attack into Tiamat right between the eyes and announced, "Dragon Sage Art. Divine Dragon Spiraling Gem." The force of the attack launched Tiamat back down to the ground with painfully jarring force and left the dragon dazed. Warad and Precht capitalized on this to restrain the dragon once more. Mavis heard Kurama advise her, "We'll need to destroy that dragon completely before we can take the Tenru Jade, and considering how durable that overgrown lizard is, you'll need to put everything you have into your strongest attack and hit him with everything you've got. Hold nothing back." Mavis nodded and shouted, "Guys, I need you to restrain Tiamat with all you have. I need time to prepare something." "Right," was the response she got from her friends. Mavis took a deep breath and her hands began to glow with power. She entered a stance with her left foot forward and her right foot was planted behind her for support as she held her arms in front of her with her left hand above her right. She then moved her hands to her side right above her right hip and a brilliant orb of white light appeared between her hands. She incanted, "Now, with all I have Dragon Sage secret art." Tiamat tried to break free from his restraints, but before he could, Medic descended on him with a flying axe kick and shouted, "Heaven kick of pain." The heel drop painfully forced Tiamat back into the ground and formed a crater. The orb of white light grew brighter and larger in Mavis's hands as she channeled more of her power into it. Tiamat sensed the amount of power Mavis was outputting and thrashed violently. With a display of strength that even Tiamat did not know he had, he broke through his restraints and glared down at Mavis. Tiamat knew that he had to end this now and breathed a massive stream of blue fire at Mavis, and she responded in kind by thrusting the orb of light in front of her with her right hand on top of her left while shouting, "Divine Wrath." Launching a massive beam of light to meet Tiamat's wave of blue flames. The two powers clashed halfway between the two forces. Dragon and Dragon Slayer clashed their wills against each other and poured more power into their attacks as Medic, Prekt, Yuri, and Warad stood clear of the blast zone. Unfortunately, after a minute of clashing, Mavis's beam began to lose ground. Prekt, Warad, and Yuri began to distract Tiamat again out of concern for their friend. Prekt and Warad tried to divert Tiamat's aim with their chains and trees, while Yuri did everything within his power to blind Tiamat. Unfortunately, their efforts amounted to nothing. Tiamat had closed his eyes to avoid getting blinded again and focused all of its considerable strength towards his attack and was not going to let anything distract him or divert the course of his attack. While the boys focused on Tiamat, Medic got behind Mavis and began to use her Mystic Palm technique on her. Infusing some of her chakra into Mavis and renewing her strength. This combined effort was enough to get Mavis to push Tiamat's flames back to the halfway point of the clash. It was then that Kurama's voice echoed through Mavis's mind and Medic's due to her chakra being connected to Mavis's for the moment. "Mavis, I'm about to add my power to your attack. I need you to brace yourself for a wave of pain. Your chakra may have finally adjusted to my presence, but your body is still not used to my power." Kurama then directed his attention to Medic, aware of her presence, "And you, Sakura, or whatever you're calling yourself these days. I need you to numb her pain receptors as much as you can. I'm going to give this girl the final push she needs to finish this fight." Mavis closed her eyes and tensed in barely numbed pain as a dense golden aura surrounded her body. Kurama's power then influenced the Divine Wrath beam by changing its color from shimmering white to a brilliant gold. Mavis belted out a cry of exertion and pain as she channeled hers and Kurama's power into her attack. The Divine Wrath beam quickly began to overtake Tiamat's blue flames and soon broke through and crashed into him. Tiamat roared in pain as the attack enveloped him and tore him apart piece by piece until all that remained was the Tenru Jade as it fell to the ground. Mavis staggered and fell back into Medic's arms as Prekt, Warad, and Yuri ran to her. She passed out right when they came within arm's reach. Later at night, over 48 hours later at sea, Mavis awoke a few hours later feeling absolutely miserable. She opened her eyes and noticed that it was night and felt the ground under her shifting gently as if she were on a boat at sea. Then she smelled salt water and realized that she really was at sea. Mavis drunkenly tried to stand up only to fall over and nearly puke her guts out. The sound of Kurama laughing all 9 of his tails off at her suffering was not helpful at all as her eyes went comically white with discomfort as she clumsily reached for the rails. Sweet relief from her motion sickness lied just beyond those rails. Unfortunately, Medic had different plans for her and laid her back down on the wooden floor and examined her. It appears she's suffering from motion sickness." Mavis then heard Yuri say, "What? How?" She traveled to Tenru Island just fine by herself and she seemed perfectly fine traveling to Harjan port with us by boat. Why is she suffering from it now? Yuri's words jogged Mavis's memory and she felt around for her Haori while doing everything within her power to keep the bile rising up her throat from reaching her mouth. She found that Medic had set her Haori up as a pillow for her to rest her head on and found the scroll she kept in one of its hidden pockets and shakily presented it to Medic while cutely groaning in discomfort. Medic examined the scroll and tried to decipher the individual seals that she saw written in it. Unfortunately, Mavis was much more well versed in Fuinjutsu than Medic, so she had to show the seals to the motion-sick Dragon Slayer until Mavis shakily pointed to the one she was looking for and motioned for Medic to apply it to her arm. When she did so, Mavis swallowed the bile that was threatening to spill out of her mouth and let out a sigh of relief and disgust for the taste of bile that now inhabited her mouth. Medic said, "Well, I guess we now know how she's able to stand transportation despite having motion sickness." Mavis nodded and stood up. The only thing I hate about my anti-motion sickness seal is that I have to reapply it every time I have to use transportation. Mavis finally took stock of her surroundings and noticed that the boat she was on was the same motorboat that she traveled to Harjan port in with Precht, Warad, and Yuri. She then panicked and rapidly asked, "How long have I been out? What happened to Magnolia? Where's the Tenru Jade?" The girl's friend spent a good 5 minutes calming her down and answering her questions. Medic answered the first one, "You've been out for nearly 50 hours because your last attack made you suffer from chakra exhaustion. I've been taking care of you ever since, well Precht, Warad, and Yuri took care of the people of Magnolia." Yuri continued for Medic, "Yeah, which was fun by the way. They were really grateful to us since we freed them from Blue Skull. Though that gratefulness towards us kinda turned into hero worship for you when we told them that you were the one slayed Tiamat." Precht finished by holding up a wooden box. "As for the Tenru Jade, I picked it up with a shovel and put it in this box. I figured that it would be a simple but effective way to carry the Tenru Jade without touching it." Mavis nodded, understanding Precht's logic. She then asked, "How did we get here so fast?" "The hike from Harjan to Magnolia lasted 3 days." Borad answered over the hum of the Lacrima-powered motor he was steering. "The townspeople gave us horses to ride back to Harjan when we explained that we needed to return the Tenru Jade to where it belongs as quickly as possible. Thankfully, they didn't ask questions so that cut down on how much time it took to get this far." Yuri sighed and reclined against the inside of the boat's bow. "We can finally rest easy now. We're almost to Tenru Island and with plenty of time to spare." Mavis nodded, "Yes, so long as the visions my foresight showed me hold true and our timetable doesn't accelerate, we still have a few days before the Shinju's release." Yuri cheered, "Then I say we all take a well-deserved rest. If anyone's earned it, it's us considering how we booked it here straight from Magnolia without resting well, everyone except you Mavis. You were out like a light for the entire trip." Everyone got a much-needed laugh from Yuri's statement and Mavis took it all in good humor. Unfortunately, Yuri's statement about them finally being able to rest easy jinxed them. Mavis sensed a spike of malevolent energy in the direction of Tenru Island and noticed the ominous storm clouds looming only in that direction. The energy then began to rapidly fluctuate. Things only got more ominous when the wooden box Precht put the Tenru Jade in began to rattle, forcing the person closest to it at the moment, Medic, to firmly hold it shut. The more Mavis focused on the energy spike, the more her head began to hurt until her eyes glazed over, she broke out in a cold sweat, and then she screamed in pain and fell down. "Mavis!" Her friends called out as Precht caught her. Mavis didn't stay down long and jolted back up, eyes wide with horror. Yuri grabbed Mavis's shoulders and asked, remembering some of her previous episodes earlier during their journey, "What happened? Was it your foresight again?" Mavis nodded numbly and shakily asked, "Yuri, I need you to answer 2 questions for me. Where is the moon right now, and what phase is it in?" Yuri searched the sky and saw that it was full and still low in the sky. It was probably only 9 o'clock. It's still low in the sky and it's a full moon. Mavis's eyes widened even further and gasped in horror as fearful tears freely streamed down her face. "We were almost out of time." Everyone looked at Mavis in shock and horror. Precht asked, "But I thought we still had a few days." Mavis shakily shook her head, "Our timetable has accelerated. In my vision the Shinju broke free during the night of the full moon. When the moon reached its peak in the night sky midnight, we need to move faster now. We don't have a few days to get there anymore. We only have a few hours." That was all the prompting Warad needed to push the boat's Lacrima motor to its limit and speed the boat across the water at its maximum speed. Warad, Precht, and Yuri remembered the very brief memory of the Shinju's might that Minato showed them back when they first visited Tenru Island. Mavis was constantly haunted by visions of the monster's release, and Medic actually fought it before. Nobody on the boat wanted to meet the Shinju face to face tonight. Tenru Island. 15 minutes to doomsday. All 5 members of the group raced through Tenru Island's forest. Precht, Yuri, and Warad trailed behind Mavis and Medic as they raced across the treetops. Mavis made the mistake of looking up and saw the moon peeking through the storm clouds. It was almost at its peak. Urgency drove Mavis to push chakra into her feet and recklessly leaped across the treetops faster than ever, holding the box containing the Tenru Jade in a death grip against her chest. She could feel the gem doing everything within its power to break free of its confinement, but Mavis held firm and sped across the treetops, ignoring the howling winds, the boom of thunder and the crash of lightning that plagued the island. Mavis spotted the entrance to the sealing chamber with minutes to spare and bolted through the caves with Medic right behind her. The 2 females entered the room of the seal and were horrified by how fragile it now looked. To Mavis, it was a literal nightmare come true, a nightmare that she refused to see play out. She had resolved herself to overcome her visions, she refused to allow her nightmares come to pass. Mavis shouted, "Ancestor. Minato. I'm back. I've brought the transfer gem. The Tenru Jade." Minato turned his head slightly, his hand still planted firmly on the seal, and said with urgency in his voice, "Place it in the space between my hands, hurry, I can't hold it back for much longer." Mavis opened the box and snatched the Tenru jade out of the air as it tried to escape. That was where things went from terrible to near hopeless. Mavis screamed in pain as the Tenru jade radiated rancid black chakra and tried to possess her. She could feel Kurama's chakra doing its job by ejecting the foreign chakra from her body as quickly as it entered, but as it passed through, Mavis saw brief glimpses of another person's life. In it, she saw an era of bloody war. Two women fighting to end those wars, one wielding the gift of chakra and the other with the gift of magic. What surprised Mavis was that the woman using magic looked like an older version of herself. Mana. She wondered as the name came to her. She then saw flashes of the relationship between the women going sour. Then finally, she saw them turn on each other and battle to the death. She heard muffled voices calling out something. It became clearer and clearer until she realized that her undead ancestor and medic were calling out to her. Mavis snapped back to reality with her right hand in excruciating pain, but still holding the Tenru jade in a death grip. She refused to let the transfer gem escape. Mavis staggered up to Minato and reached up to return the gem to its rightful place, drowning out the furious cries of a hateful woman. "No. Not when I'm so close. I'm so close to freedom. Damn you, Mana. Damn you to hell." The Tenru jade slipped snugly into its place in the seal, and the array reconnected itself to the transfer gem, locking it in place and restoring the seal to full power. Minato backed away and caught Mavis as she fell backwards with a sigh of relief and smile on her face. She had finally defeated fate. Mavis Vermilion had finally changed the future. Prekt, Warad, and Yuri reached the entrance to the sealing chamber just in time for the weather to settle down. The oppressive malevolent presence that they felt radiating from the island was gone, locked behind its seal once more. The second they saw Mavis, Medic, and Minato walk out of the sealing chamber with smiles on their faces, they knew that it was over. They won. Part 3. The Fairy's Tale. I've seen chaos and strife on the grand scale of war more times than I'd ever care to count. Which probably isn't much considering how I'd never bothered to count how many wars I've seen in both life and my current undead existence. However, these wars have taught me that there is one immaterial thing that must always be treasured and protected above all else. Hope. This is why I have protected Naruto's sealing grounds for so long, and why I have defended shinobi descendants from Madara's shadow forces wherever I can find them. It is why I left Mavis in North Swain's care when I rescued her from Black Zetsu. I was once known as the savior of this world, and my son was too. I failed to live up to that title while Naruto succeeded, if only temporarily. Now it looks like Mavis will very well one day inherit more from her ancestors than just our will of fire. If I failed while Naruto only somewhat succeeded, will she be the one to finish what we started and permanently lay the dark shadows of the era of shinobi to rest? Minato Namikaze. December 23, X 691. Fairy Tail Guild Hall. Just 2 days before Christmas, and the 5-year-old Guild of Fairy Tail was already celebrating as if it were Christmas, minus the presents. Decorations were everywhere, especially the conveniently placed mistletoe that Yuri was taking full advantage of with his wife of 1 year Rita. There was also a fully decorated Christmas tree crash, which was toppled over and destroyed by a bar brawl again. Medic was not amused and sent everyone participating in the brawl flying with her chakra-enhanced strength, flashing a red fairy tail crest on her right shoulder while shouting, "That was the 15th tree you brats have destroyed. Keep this up and you'll be spending Christmas in the hospital." Medic then directed her wrath at Warad, who was watching the brawl with amusement while leaning against a wall, "And you didn't even try to stop them. Now we need to get another tree for the guild hall." Warad just smiled in amusement and said, "I don't see what the problem is, I can just grow a new one on the spot and we can move the decorations from the old one to the new one. Problem solved." The guild's resident disciplinarian groaned in aggravation and replied, "It's the principle of the matter that I'm trying to beat into these idiots' heads. Which is why you will not be growing a new one for the guild." Medic then redirected her ire back towards the perpetrators of the brawl, one of them being Prekt. "That's right. Warad will not be growing a new Christmas tree for you this time, you ingrates. You will have to get one the old-fashioned way. You'll have to find one by yourselves, cut it down, drag it back to the guild, and then decorate it. Maybe then you will all learn to be more responsible with your destructive behavior." The group froze and stared at Medic. "Well, what are you waiting for? If you hurry, you might just make it back with a tree before Christmas Eve." Medic urged, knowing that it would take at least a whole day for the group to hike through the mountains near Magnolia and come back with a pine tree. The group immediately took off to prepare for their forced hiking trip. Medic shook her head and sighed in satisfaction. If her plan succeeds, the more belligerent members of the guild she, Mavis, Prekt, Yuri, and Warad founded would spend all of Christmas Eve too exhausted to destroy anything, which would result in the guild hall actually having a Christmas tree on Christmas. 1 hour passed since Medic chased a majority of the guild members out of the hall to get a new Christmas tree. The only ones left that were still there were Mavis, Medic, Warad, Yuri, Rita, the bartender, and about 10 other members that were just either lazing around or observing the job board for any jobs that they might want to reserve for later. It was in this moment of complacency that what would be known as the Fairy Christmas Eve began. It started innocently enough, a job request appeared on the board in a cluster of golden sparkles. Then one of the members asked Mavis about it since it was a request appeared to be addressed to her specifically. It was an escort request from someone named Nick and it said that he could be found in a village called Rosemary. The request said that he would explain where he needed to be escorted upon meeting with him and that the reward would be the information on fairies that she has been searching for all her life. Needless to say, Mavis bolted out the door, white Haori with blue flames, and the golden fairy tail crest on the back, fluttering in the wind and winter boots, clapping against the ground as she ran off before anyone could get a word in. Medic grabbed the request, read it, and groaned, figures a reward like that would get her bolting down to the train station at top speed. The thought of this being a trap for her probably didn't even cross her mind. Orad added, well, it did appear on the board in a cluster of sparkles, so who knows. It might be sincere and even be from one of those fairies that Mavis always fantasizes about. Either way, we can't let her go off alone like this. I've been around long enough to know that there is always more to jobs like this than there appears to be. Both Warad and Medic chased after the 18-year-old first master of fairy tale, but only after Medic put Yuri in charge of the guild while they were gone. This meant Yuri had to spend less time fawning over his wife and more time making sure the guild members didn't blow up the guild hall. December 24, morning. Rosemary Village. When Mavis took the train to the closest town to Rosemary, she bitterly regretted not stopping by her house to pick up her scroll of seals first. She had to suffer the train ride without her anti-motion sickness seal. It only got worse when Warad and Medic caught up. Medic deliberately refused to help, saying that it would teach her to not run off on her own on impulse, and Warad wouldn't have been any help in that situation anyway. When Mavis was dragged off the train and recovered, Mavis urged her two friends to let her continue with the request after she stopped kissing the ground. Begrudgingly, on Medic's part, they decided to see the job through. They did not make it to Rosemary Village until late at night and would have camped out in the cold and snow if a kind man named Sori Elijah and his pregnant wife, Rose, had not insisted that they stay the night at their place. The young couple was very hospitable and even offered to feed them breakfast before they left. Mavis would have declined, insisting that they've already intruded on them enough, if not for Mavis's stomach begging to differ. They stayed breakfast. While they did so, Medic took notice of a very familiar sword hung on the wall in the house's living room adjacent to the kitchen. While Medic was distracted, Mavis started a conversation with Sori over the antiques that Sori had scattered all over the house, which resulted in a lengthy geek out over the relics and what eras they believed they came from, while Warad ate his pancakes in silence while observing the nerdfest with amusement. Rose decided to let the new best friends have their geek out and directed her attention to the only other female in the house that was not a ruined nerd. She noticed that Medic was focused on her family's ancestral sword, a very large two-handed broadsword with a bladed semicircular notch near that handle and a large hole near the tip of the blade. Rose guided Medic to the living room after they both finished their breakfast, absent-mindedly playing with a jade bead attached to a lock of short red hair framing her face. She joined Medic in observing the blade and said, "That sword is probably the only old thing in this house that I actually know anything about. The rest is just a bunch of old junk that Sori found during his archaeologist expeditions that he didn't want me selling back when I as part of the Spirophithers Merchant Guild." Medic nodded and Rose continued, "The only reason I know anything about it is because it has been in my family for more generations than anyone would bother to count. Sori has tried time and again to figure out how old it is and what era it was made in. He's finally concluded that it was made during the era of shinobi on the Alakatasian continent and that one of my ancestors used it and passed it on from parent to child until it eventually fell into my possession." Medic responded, his guess was right on the money as far as when it was made goes. "Really? How would you know?" Rose asked with interest. "I'm something of an expert on the era of shinobi, but don't worry, I'm not a nerd about it like Mavis and your husband are." Rose made an exaggerated sigh of relief before saying, "That's good, one ruined nerd in the house is enough, and two is pushing it. I don't need a third geeking out about all the old stuff Sori puts on display in my house. Anyway, what can you tell me about this sword?" "All I know is that it literally drinks blood, don't ask me how I found that out." Medic explained, "It's called the decapitating carving knife and is part of a set of 7 swords that were used by an elite group of shinobi known as the 7 Ninja Swordsmen of the Mist." Rose looked a little unnerved and said, "That's a very brutal sounding name, then again, this sword has always unnerved me. The only reason I didn't sell it back when I was with the Spirophithers was because it has sentimental value as a family heirloom. It's a brutal sword, but not the cruelest of its set. That title is reserved for the Nabari." "What does that sword do?" Rose asked and immediately wished that she didn't. A decapitating carving knife might drink the blood of its victims to repair itself, but the Nabari was designed for torture instead of instantly killing its victims. The Nabari was also known as the sewing needle, with a wire attached to it, the Nabari could cut its victims up and then sew them together however the wielder wanted to. Medic said, remembering seeing it in action back during the Fourth Great Shinobi War. Rose turned a little green at the thought of such a weapon and shifted the subject to the other swords. Well, what are the other ones like? Medic quirked an eyebrow and asked, why do you want to know? I just figured I might keep an eye out for them so I could sell them if I ever rejoin the merchant guild. Antique swords like those are guaranteed to be worth a fortune. Medic responded, the other 5 swords are nowhere near as brutal as the Nabari, but one of them does come close. There's the helmet splitter, which is actually a giant axe attached to a chain and was designed to break through any defense. Then there's the shibuki, a sword that has a giant scroll full of explosives attached to it. Don't ask how it doesn't blow itself apart, because I don't know either. The twin kiba blades emit lightning and are capable of cutting through anything, and the hiramakare can take on many forms, depending on how the user channels his or her chakra into it. Rose nodded and didn't ask about chakra, so it's possible that she already knows about it and motioned for Medic to continue. The last one is arguably the strongest blade and will probably be the most difficult one for you to find if you go looking for these swords. It's called Samahata, the sharkskin blade, and is actually a sentient sword that shreds its victims instead of just cutting them. It also has the power to drain its victims of their energy and is rumored to be capable of choosing and rejecting its wielders. Rose raised an eyebrow at that last description and said, I'd call you out on how ridiculous that last one sounded if it wasn't for how descriptive you were about those swords. I think I've actually seen a few of them while traveling with the Spirophithers, so I might just look into them someday. Medic responded, I'm more surprised that you didn't ask what chakra was when I mentioned it. Oh, already know what chakra is. My late father told me about it and showed me how to use it. I am a descendant of Shinobi, Rose explained. The trio said their farewells to the nice couple before noon and set off to find this Nick that Mavis was looking for. Mavis already had a theory about exactly who they were looking for. According to her, Nick should be a somewhat elderly man that would be noticeably jollier than everyone else around him and trying to spread good cheer everywhere he goes. Borad summed up, so we're looking for someone trying to emulate Santa Claus. No, we're looking for Santa Claus, Mavis corrected. Medic sighed, Mavis, I don't know how to tell you this. In fact, I thought that you already knew this, but Santa isn't real. He's a myth. So is the era of Shinobi, Mavis retorted. Great, so this is all a wild goose chase to find someone that doesn't exist, Medic groaned. Mavis took off for the town square while Warad asked Medic, how long should we indulge this fantasy of hers before we drag her back to Magnolia? Medic responded with her arms crossed, give her an hour or two, then we'll just drag her back whether she likes it or not. We'll just shove her in a wheelbarrow and carry her back to the nearest train station in it. But how would that right, motion sickness. Mavis quickly came scampering back with a jolly elderly man wearing a floppy black hat with all manner of buttons pinned to it. Pound him. Mavis announced. Needless to say, Warad and Medic's jaws dropped slightly as they stared at Mavis and the elderly man as he introduced himself. Hello, as I'm sure you have already guessed, I am Santa Claus. Warad and Medic were still in shock as they trudged through the snow, following Mavis and the man claiming to be Santa Claus. They honestly believed that this was all just an elaborate hoax, and Medic went so far as to believe that this was one of Black Zetsu's traps. However, Warad was sold on Nick's identity when he pulled a joke book out of his hat and gave it to him while saying Merry Christmas. Warad never told anyone that he wanted a joke book for Christmas, so this caught him completely off guard and was enough to convince him that Nick is more than just a jolly old man. Mavis noticed that Santa also tried to hold a conversation with Medic. It appeared to be a conversation revolving around Santa, urging her to not give up hope on something, even called her by her original name, Sakura. However, the just resulted in Medic harshly demanding that he leave her alone. Nick took that as a sign for him to bow out and give her some space. Medic, currently feeling annoyed at the current situation, decided to ask, where exactly are we going anyway? Neither of you bothered to share with the rest of us just where we need to escort Nick. Mavis smiled at Medic and said, isn't it obvious? He's Santa, so we need to escort him to the North Pole. And how are we going to get him there before tomorrow? Medic asked, feeling even more annoyed. Nick answered, to be more precise, I just need to be at a magical Lee Point North Earthland's northern equator. It doesn't necessarily need to be the North Pole, it's just the most ideal Lee point for me to do what I need to do by midnight tonight. As for how, that's why I sent that request to Mavis. My normal method of getting to the North Pole on time is unavailable to me because he is preoccupied with keeping the lingering will of the greatest evil to ever walk Earthland away from me. So while that shadow is preoccupied, I require another means of quick travel, which is where young Mavis comes in. Avis continued, you see, the reason why he chose Rosemary to be our meeting place is because it is the closest village to the Fiori Spearcrest. This caught Warad's attention. Whoa, you want to go there? Mavis, I trust you, but going there is insane. Not only is it the tallest mountain in Fiori, but it's also haunted by an aggressive ancient spirit that has been lurking there for thousands of years. Mavis was not deterred in the least. Oh, that's just North Swain. He likes to scare people off when he thinks people are trying to scale his mountain. He calls it as one source of amusement when I'm not around. Wait, that's where the dragon that taught you Dragon Slayer magic lives? Fiori Spearcrest? Warad asked. Yep. Mavis chirped. North Swain put up a barrier near the top of it to keep my training secret and to keep people from disturbing him while he's taking one of his month-long naps. That's why Nick contacted me. He's an old acquaintance of North Swain, but can't take down the barrier since it can only be taken down by the same type of magic that put it up. Medic asked Nick, out of curiosity, how do you normally travel to the North Pole? You said that someone takes you there. Who is that person? Why do you need to get to the northernmost Lee points in the world? It all started a little over 600 years ago when I was rescued from that shadow by a stern man named Tobarama Senju. After rescuing me, he had me meet with his elder brother and comrades Hashirama, Hiruzen, and Minato. I told them about what I truly am and what I planned to do to atone for what I did while I was corrupted by the malevolence that seeped into the world's Lee lines during the era of Shinobi. Avis interrupted, wait, what did you do during the era of Shinobi? Her face then shifted to a look of horror. Please don't tell me you were. Nick cut her off with a sad smile and said, perhaps I should simply tell you all the story of how I became Santa Claus. What I am, what the constant warfare of the era of Shinobi did to me, and how things came to be the way they are now. Long ago, back before humans knew how to use chakra or magic, before the continents of Alakatasia and Ishkar were split apart, and before any dragons even considered protecting humanity. Mankind, when it was still in its infancy as a race, and was protected by a race known as the Heavenly Messengers, the Fairies. I was one of them, the only one lucky enough to escape the wrath of the greatest evil to ever exist. When mankind became populous enough to erect territories of their own, we took this as a sign that mankind was ready to stand on its own and return to our home, the Great Mana Tree. Unfortunately, it was after we left that humans began to squabble among themselves over land and eventually waged war on each other. The fighting lasted decades and appeared to have no end in sight as the conflict only continued to spread. Eventually, two human girls, one being the exiled princess of the human territories kingdom and the other being her only friend, appealed to the fairies for a means to stop the endless warfare. The fairy leader, Sylph, granted their wish and gave them each a gift for them to use to stop the wars. The princess gained the gift of chakra while her friend gained the gift of magic. They each embarked on quests to hone their new gifts and use them to convince the territory leaders to stop their endless wars, with varying degrees of success. Though the two were separated, the princess eventually came to the conclusion that the only way for the territories to stop warring against each other was for them all to be united under one person. She decided that she was that person they had to be united under and waged a bloody war of conquest. It was during that war that she decided that she needed more power to complete her conquest and once more turned to the fairies. This time, however, Sylph noticed that the princess had become drunk on her own power and rejected her call for aid. She did not take well to Sylph's answer. I believe that this is where the princess's descent into insanity began because she vowed to exact revenge on the fairies for denying her and take their power from them by force. We should have taken her threat seriously, but instead disregarded her words as the ramblings of a spoiled child. I don't know how she did it, but shortly after she gained complete mastery over her powers, the princess somehow managed to forcibly fuse all the fairies to their home, the Great Mana Tree, and warp the fairies' once home, now prison, into a colossal column of a tree where a fruit containing a godly amount of chakra grew at the top. I narrowly escaped that fate, and the memory of that day shall haunt me for the rest of my life, the day the Shinju was born. The princess ate that fruit and gained a godly amount of power that manifested as a pair of rabbit ear-like horns and a third eye, more than enough for her to conquer the world and rule it with an iron fist. As she conquered the western half of world's only continent at the time, even dragons came to fear her, all except one. On the eastern half of the continent that the princess's friend traveled to, she came to know the leaders of the humans in those territories and learned that the only reason that fighting was happening there was because the leaders were trying to move west, away from the dragons that were terrorizing their people. The Western territories were refusing their requests for refuge, and the situation in the Eastern territories eventually became so desperate that the only way for them to escape the dragons was to fight for land away from the dragons. The princess's friend searched for a solution to the humans' plight and found it in the form of a dragon that was not aggressive to humans, the divine dragon, North Swain. Under him, she learned divine dragon slayer magic and used it to protect humanity's eastern territories from their dragon aggressors. She slayed countless dragons in her quest to protect the Eastern Territories until the demand she was trying to convey to the dragons was finally obeyed, the demand to leave the Eastern Territories alone. With the threat of dragons neutralized, the leaders of the Eastern Territory saw no more reason to expand their territory and ceased fighting with their western neighbors. The princess and her friend were complete opposites when the two met again at the border between the East and the West. The princess had become the empress of an empire of her own creation, and her friend had become the guardian of the Eastern Territories. The two fought briefly, but came to an understanding: so long as the East and the West do not quarrel, then their original goal of stopping the endless wars that started their quests had been fulfilled. It was a decade later when the great calamity happened. The princess, now empress, became more and more obsessed with her own power. Obsessed to the point where she came to believe that she was the only being in the world allowed to possess chakra. This came to be a problem when she had two sons. It was after they were born when she realized the chakra could be inherited. Her sons inherited her chakra, and in time she came to the conclusion that they could become a legitimate threat to her if left unchecked. The Empress's friend, who was gifted with the power of foresight by the fairies, foresaw that the Empress would brutally murder her own children by draining their chakra dry until they were dead and moved to stop her. She barely made it in time to rescue the Empress's children from their own mother. It was at this moment that the Empress's friend saw just how far her former friend had fallen, and the Empress revealed what she had done to the fairies shortly before her friend escaped with the two gifted children. The Empress, desperate to reclaim the chakra that her sons inherited, cast an abominable technique on her half of the world, a technique that reflected the image of her third eye off the moon and entrapped her people in an illusion, a technique known as the Infinite Tsukiyomi. She then took control of the Shinju tree and used it to entrap her people with its roots. It was after the technique was complete that she realized that her former friend and her twin sons somehow managed to escape. Growing even more desperate, the Empress maid traveled for days until she reached the base of the great Shinju tree and merged with it to become the Shinju beast, a monster of horrifying godlike power. It was when the transformation was complete, the side effects of being trapped and drained by the great Shinju tree were revealed. Every single victim of the technique was mutated into creatures I believe Sakura would refer to as white Zetsu. I told you not to call me that. I've thrown that name away. Anyway, the Shinju beast amassed its army of mindlessly obedient white Zetsu and chased its former friend to the border between the eastern and western sides of the continent. It was there that the former friends met for the last time. The Empress's friend left the Empress's twin sons in the hands of her eldest daughter before she faced the Shinju in battle. The battle that was fought between the Shinju and the first divine dragon slayer was without a doubt the most destructive battle in the history of the world. The Empress's former friend started it by immediately entering a dragon slayer's most powerful state, the full dragon transformation. It was then that the most destructive parts of the battle took place. The clash cleaved the continent in two and pushed them apart, creating the western continent of Alakatasia and eastern continent of Ishkar and the ocean between the two continents to protect the twins from their insane mother. When the battle turned against the divine dragon slayer, she took a measure to prevent the infinite Tsukiyomi from ever being cast again. She destroyed the moon with her divine wrath attack. The Empress's former friend fell in that battle, but her efforts were not in vain. With no means of crossing the new ocean that separated the two continents, the Shinju had to content itself with making only the western continent its domain. At least until the twins returned to the western continent after growing and mastering their powers. When they returned, they defeated the Shinju by sealing it within the elder brother, creating the world's first Jinchuriki. However, this was only a temporary solution, as its imprisonment could only last as long as the elder brother's life. Later, when the elder brother, now known as the Sage of the Six Paths, was on his deathbed from old age, he divided the Shinju into 9 fragments, creating the tailed beasts, and created a new moon to imprison the Shinju's husk. This is the story of the fate of the fairies and the era before the era of shinobi. The fairies are imprisoned within the body of the Shinju, waiting for someone to find a way to release them and return their home to its true form. This is where my story of woe begins, the story of the last free fairy. I wandered the world, searching for a purpose after everything I knew was stolen from me and my home was warped beyond recognition. After the Shinju was sealed in the new moon, that wandering changed to running because the Shinju created a sentient manifestation of its will in its brief moment of freedom while the moon was being created. A shadow devoted to freeing its mother, a creature you all know as Black Zetsu. It hunted me when it was not manipulating history to its liking. To escape Black Zetsu, I hid myself where natural energy, Ethernano, flows throughout the world. I hid myself in the world's ley lines. However, what I did not know until that moment was that by hiding myself within the ley lines, my nature became subject to the state of the world. In times of peace, I would be my usual self, but in times of war and suffering, malevolence would seep into the ley lines and slowly infect my state of mind. A few years into the era of shinobi, the malevolence became too great and I transformed into a fairy's negative state. I became a Spriggan and was called the Krampus, pronounced Crumpus. I did so many things that I wish I could take back. At the beginning of the last month of each year, I would emerge from the world's ley lines and kidnap naughty children from their homes at night. I would hang them in baskets from the biggest tree I could find upon my emergence from the ley lines, and on the 25th day after my emergence, I would eat them. Some of them were still alive when I did that. The end of the era of Shinobi, when the malevolence finally dissipated from the world's ley lines, was the time period of my salvation. I was finally myself again for the first time in centuries, and I absolutely loathed myself for what I had done while influenced by the world's malevolence. It was during my first month as myself after centuries, I heard a story about a boy that brought hope to a hopeless situation. I learned that the Shinju had been unleashed upon the world once more and caused untold destruction to the western continent, murdering millions in brief instants. The boy, however, did not break under the despair the Shinju instilled upon humanity and sealed it within himself to keep it from harming anyone else, bearing the burden of finding a way to prevent the beast from ever harming anyone ever again. The story taught me that no matter how bad a situation may become, hope will never die, and I was inspired to find a way to atone for my sins as the Krampus. It took me a few years of thought in the ley lines and wandering the world for the brief months of December I had outside the ley lines, but eventually, I found a way to begin atoning for my sins. I decided that I would give the world a gift every year on the 25th of December. The gift of hope. I would spend every day I have outside the ley lines participating in acts of goodwill, accumulating positive energy until I am filled to the bursting point. Then I would travel to the northernmost ley points where the world absorbs all manner of energy from the cosmos, usually helped by Minato Namikaze, since he could warp me there in a literal flash, and flood the world's ley lines with all the positive energy I accumulated over the preceding 25 days. That positive energy then influences people to be more charitable, more likely to partake in random acts of kindness, more likely to make that one final push to break a bad habit that has been destroying them, and all around be better people. This procedure has prevented war from breaking out on more than one occasion. Nick concluded, and that is my story. I do not travel around the world giving gifts to good children. I only have one gift to give, and it is one that I am determined to give to the world every year. The group was at the halfway point of the Fiori Spear Crest, and Mavis was hugging Nick, comforting the first and possibly only fairy she would ever meet, resting her forehead against his shoulder. Medic mused, a little sickened by what Nick was during her childhood, so the stories about the Krampus were true after all. I thought it was just one of those stories parents told children to scare them into behaving. Nick responded, all myths are based on a true story, no matter how gruesome the story may be. Mavis let go of Nick, walked alongside him and said, and this is why Black Zetsu is after you, you're the only fairy his mother failed to capture. He's trying to carry out her will and enact her revenge against the fairies. Nick nodded, I would have gone to the North Pole through my usual method of having Minato warp me there, since he left one of his flying Raging Seals at the North Pole, for him to warp me to, but Black Zetsu was waiting for us there this year. He discovered the pattern. So Minato warped me back to where he found me for my own safety and went back to deal with Black Zetsu. Borad added, which brings us to where we are now. He then walked into an invisible wall and said in a muffled deadpan, I found the barrier. Mavis, this is where you come in, Medic instructed. Mavis nodded and pressed a glowing hand against the barrier, causing it to fall. The group then heard the sound of a very loud snort, as if something just woke up. The group rushed to the top of the mountain as quickly as possible, but was stopped when the wind picked up and a very deep and loud voice shouted, for thousands of years I lay dormant. Who has disturbed my Hi Grandpa North Swain? Mavis energetically interrupted by shouting at the top of her lungs. The wind immediately stopped and a massive aquamarine dragon head peered over the top of the mountain. The group observed that it had blue eyes and fin-like protrusions where the cheek and mouth meet. North Swain deadpanned, oh, it's you. Hello Mavis, I see you've met Nick. Congratulations, you've finally met a fairy. North Swain allowed the group to scale the rest of the mountain, and when they reached the top, Medic and Warad were left slack-jawed in shock of North Swain's massive size. If Tiamat could be considered giant, then North Swain would be outright massive because he was easily twice Tiamat's size. Kurama watched from within Mavis and whistled, and I thought I was big. This creature has to be at least a head taller than me at full strength. Mavis explained Nick's situation and asked if he could take them to the North Pole before midnight. North Swain gave Nick an annoyed look and told him, you're very lucky you brought Mavis with you when you came here. If you did not, I would have chased you away without bothering to listen to your predicament. North Swain stood up and stretched his wings, revealing the shimmering white membrane of his wings and his pure white underbelly. This caused Medic and Warad to gawk even further at North Swain's massive size. Definitely bigger than Tiamat, they both thought. North Swain knelt down and put his right hand on the ground with the palm up, signaling the group to climb on. The dragon deposited the group of four on his back and told them, grab onto something and hold on tight. Once I start flying, I won't stop until we reach our destination." The divine dragon mightily beat his wings and took off while the group of 4 on his back held onto his scales for dear life. It was only after they had ascended past the cloud barrier that Warod realized that Mavis wasn't suffering from motion sickness like she probably should have, considering how they were being transported. In fact, she was laughing and having the time of her life. Warod shouted to Mavis, "Hey Mavis. I have a question." Mavis looked back at Warod and smiled, "What is it? How are you not suffering from motion sickness? We're being transported through the air by a giant dragon." Mavis's face morphed into an indignant look and responded, "Grandpa North Swain isn't transportation. He's family. Why would riding on his back make me motion sick? Only transportation does that." Mavis's response only confused Warod further, and Medic decided to just assume that Mavis's exception to her motion sickness was a case of mind over matter. North Swain laughed at this exchange and decided to fly a little faster. Night had fallen when North Swain landed. Mavis, Warod, and Medic looked around in wonder as they saw an aurora of colors floating over them in the sky. They saw their destination, a section of frozen land where part of the aurora actually sunk down into the land. That was the northernmost point in the world, the North Pole. They saw someone they recognized running towards them. It was Minato. "Hi Minato." Mavis smiled at her undead ancestor as she ran up to him. "It's good to see you again, Mavis. You've grown." Minato replied. "MMHMM. I've also completely mastered the Rasengan, added my wind chakra affinity and everything." Minato smiled and playfully ruffled her hair, noticing that her head was level with his shoulder now as they walked to the North Pole point. He then directed his attention towards North Swain and said, "It's good to see you again too, North Swain. How long has it been now?" 12 years. "It has." North Swain replied, "I still haven't paid you back for dumping this brat on me. Maybe I'll drop one of the teeth I lose every other year on you." Minato just smiled and said, "I know you don't really mind, because in the end no matter how much you deny it, you will always be a big softie when it comes to children." North Swain just huffed and moved closer to the North Pole point, assuming a lookout position. Everyone else assumed positions of their own after Nick entered the Lee point, and Minato informed them that he can sense that Black Zetsu is still lurking somewhere near the North Pole. All the group assumed defensive positions, with Warod growing a few trees for him to use against the walking shadow if it were to appear. Mavis took this opportunity to catch up with her adoptive grandfather. "Grandpa, when Nick told me about the past and what happened to the fairies, he mentioned that the first human to use magic, the princess's former friend, learned divine dragon slayer magic from you. What was she like?" North Swain sighed before saying, "Mana was a very gifted human. She was selfless and only wanted to help the people around her live better lives. She was still a child when I met her, young and naive. She actually tried to reason with the dragons that she protected her human friends from. Unfortunately, they just saw her and the people she was protecting as a delicacy, so she was left with no choice but to resort to force. She hated that she had to kill to protect what she cared about, but had the resolve carry out her task anyway." There's that name again. Mana. That's what the spirit of the Tenri Jade called me. You look a lot like her. In fact, you could pass as her twin right now." "Really?" Mavis asked. "Yes, considering how your inherent magic manifested itself as illusion magic and you even have her foresight ability, I wouldn't be surprised if you were her reincarnation. They are the same abilities that she had, though your abilities are also a bit more diverse than hers were, since you also have access to chakra, something she didn't have." Mavis's mind went back to the Tenru Jade, or rather, the spirit that tried to possess her. "If I really am that similar to Mana, then I can see why the spirit of the Tenru Jade, the spirit of the princess that went mad with power, would mistake me for her." "Ah, yes, Kagaya Otsutsuki. She was the one that the fairies gifted with chakra. According to Mana, she desperately wished for the people of the kingdom she came from and their neighbors to stop fighting and killing each other over territory. It's a pity that the leaders of those kingdoms were so stubborn and duplicitous in nature. If they had not sent assassins after her to the point that she decided that overwhelming force was the only way to stop them from fighting, she might not have resorted to the extremes that she did." The two waited for midnight to come in comfortable silence before Mavis asked, "By the way, how do you know my ancestor, Minato? I suppose you could call it a chance meeting." This happened back before Minato's son sealed himself away. They had traveled across the Great Sea in search of a good place for them to start the chakra transfer process and a place to hide where the chakra will go, the Shinju's prison. I could have sensed Kagaya's vile presence from miles away, so I was quite surprised when instead of finding my first adoptive granddaughter's murderer, I instead found a young man on the edge of breaking from an unimaginable amount of emotional suffering and 4 undead men prepared to fight me to protect him. The undead man called Hashirama Senju explained the situation to me and I decided to aid them, anything to spite my granddaughter's murderer. I directed them a remote island where they could begin the process and an underground labyrinth that they could use to hide the prison. Mavis nodded and took note that North Swain had a tendency to refer to Kagaya, or the Shinju, as his granddaughter's murder. Mana's murder. She sensed that underneath North Swain's tough and supposedly apathetic exterior, he truly loved anyone he would consider a grandchild of his. Even if there were only two people in the history of the world that he could call that. Mavis placed a hand against North Swain's head, which was currently resting on the frozen ground, and smiled at him before resting her head against his. North Swain smiled back and relaxed, no words needed to be exchanged between the two to let the other know how they felt. Midnight arrived and Black Zetsu still had yet to make a move against the group. North Swain gloated that they had nothing to worry about from Kagaya's shadow child, so long as he was around, and he was right. Black Zetsu was well aware of North Swain's power and how thoroughly screwed he would be if he were to invoke the wrath of the god of all dragons and be at ground zero of the awakening of said wrath. So instead, he just observed and waited for an opening for him to exploit. An opening that just wouldn't come because the divine dragon was watching his every move like a hawk eyeing its prey. Just one misstep would put it in range of the divine dragon's breath attack. In short, there was nothing Black Zetsu could do except watch. The time had come, and Nick placed his hands on the ground as the area became engulfed in golden light. That golden light then separated into 4 parts and raced along the ground in 4 different directions. The light vanished into the horizon and sunk into the ground, dispersing along the lee lines of the world, slowly infusing the entire world with the positive energy Nick absorbed over the past 25 days. With his job done, the time had come for the fairy tale members and Nick to part ways. Mavis hugged the fairy and said her goodbyes, and Warrod patted him on the back and told him that he's been doing a great thing for the world and knows that he'll continue to do so. Medic, however, looked at Nick with mixed feelings. Nick sighed and decided that it would be now or possibly never since he was vanishing into golden sparkles, returning to the lee lines. He had something that he wanted to tell her and she was going to hear it. Sakura, I know you don't like people bringing up your past, but there is something that I feel that I must tell you. Please, do not give up your hope for a happier future. You may have lost one son, but you have not lost the other. There will come a day where that son will return to you. Treasure that day and all the days that follow because I know that those will be the happiest days of your life. With that said, Nick, the last free fairy, returned to the lee lines. Medic narrowed her eyes at the space where Nick vanished from. Her feelings just got even more mixed. She was furious with the Avatar of Goodwill because he successfully opened up one of her most difficult old emotional wounds to heal, but also felt something she thought she would never feel again. Hope. Hope that she would one day see one of her sons again. The only question was which one. Would her eldest overcome the curse of the Uchiha clan, or would her youngest return to her from the abyss of death? Only time would tell. Christmas Day. Christmas at Fairy Tale is exactly what one would expect if they knew anything about the guild. It was loud, boisterous, destructive, and undeniably fun. Booze was drunk by the barrel, and various objects were flying all over the place. Gifts were exchanged, and some were broken naturally, resulting in a bar brawl that Medic would have to stop with copious amounts of physical force. This would end up causing even more damage than the brawl itself. Mavis heard a knock on the door due to her enhanced hearing and went to answer it. She opened it and saw her ancestor Minato standing there with a gift in his hand. However, he didn't stay long, or even a full second because he flashed away, dropping the gift he was carrying as a giant dragon tooth landed where he was standing. Mavis caught the present before it could hit the ground and searched the sky. Mavis briefly saw North Swain through a crack in the clouds and shouted, "Damn it, North Swain. What am I supposed to do with one of your teeth?" Mavis grumbled to herself as she pocketed her ancestor's gift and pushed the dragon tooth into the guild hall. I suppose I could take it to a blacksmith and see if they could make a sword out of it. Though with a tooth this big, I could probably get a suit of armor out of it as well. The only problem is that I don't use swords and I don't wear armor. Amic. Mavis discovers Raymond. Back 688. Mavis's age. 15. For 15 years, Mavis has not tasted a food that has been favored by her ancestors for generations. Minato, during one of his visits, decided to rectify the situation upon learning about it. Mavis's undead ancestor activated a genjutsu that made him look like he wasn't undead and warped himself and his descendant to a place that he had marked, a raiment stand in the city of Crocus. Upon arrival, Minato immediately sat himself and his descendant down on a pair of bar stools and announced his presence. "Chef. We've got an emergency situation. My friend here has never eaten ramen before. We need to get some ramen in her, stat." The chef and everyone at the stand gasped in horror before the chef hurriedly asked, "What kind do you want? I'll make it right away. First round is on the house." Mavis blinked in confusion, naively unaware that ramen is serious business. Her response was to look at the menu and say, "Pork ramen sounds good, I'll have that." Minato didn't order anything. He had a big sad reason for this. He's undead, and undead people cannot eat or taste anything. This fact has haunted him for centuries. The chef immediately went to work while muttering, "Must prevent ramen negligence syndrome, must prevent ramen negligence syndrome." 5 minutes later, the ramen was done and everyone at the ramen stand watched with interest and worry. Mavis raised her chopsticks and blew on the noodles to cool them off. She then took her first bite and her eyes widened in wonder as she finally sampled the heavenly dish of the gods that her ancestors worshipped and used as an example that there is a god that wants humanity to be happy. Mavis immediately began to slurp down her new favorite food with fervor and finished the bowl in 30 seconds flat. Mavis was speechless, never before has she ever tasted something so wonderful. It was beyond comprehension for her. The chef nodded in satisfaction, acknowledging that Mavis has become a case of another job well done. Mavis immediately ordered another bowl, this time being miso ramen. Minato saw the gleam in her eye and noticed that it was the exact same gleam that he sometimes saw in Kushina's eye when she was determined to empty his wallet. Minato nervously gulped, realizing that his wallet was not going to survive this trip. What if Naruto gets sealed away from Fairy Tail? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys next video.